Okay, well, we have quite a group here today. Very exciting. Thank you for joining us for our Public School Construction Collaborative meeting, our second one, I believe, of this year. We had one earlier this year, which was a kickoff. We want to respect your time. We will try to move the agenda along. Our goal is not to take up necessarily the 3 hours. It's getting the information across, getting your feedback, and if we're early, it just gives more time in your day. We have a lot of new updates and new reports, and appreciate your feedback, your questions. That is the purpose of this, is knowing what DSA is up to and providing to us information as to better inform us on how we can proceed with our programs. Hello, Ida Claire. I'm the state architect. I'm joined here today with a lot of DSA staff. I'd like to start with the introduction of the members real quick, and if you could state your name and who you represent, and then I'll have DSA staff also identify themselves after that. Laurel, do you want to, should we, oftentimes, why don't we start with, I don't know, how do you want to do this? There's a lot of people here today. Let's start with, I will actually pull up the list and call people. How's that? All right, Buddy Gessel, can you say hi and tell us who you represent?
Hi, I'm Buddy Gessel with DLR Group Acre Nowicki, and I'm one of the architect representatives of the group.
Thank you. Devin Conway.
Good morning, Devin Conway with Verde Design, and I am the civil engineer representative of the group.
Eric Swenson.
Eric Swenson, Geoengineering Solutions, also a state director for the California Geotechnical Engineers Association, geotechnical engineering representative.
Thank you. Fred Diamond.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Fred Diamond. I'm with Citrus College, and I'm representing the community colleges.
Jeff Becker.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeff Becker. I am with the Office of the Fresno County Superintendent of Schools and also the chair of the Coalition for Adequate School Housing, representing K-12.
Joyce Fuss.
Good morning. I'm Joyce Fuss with Lionaka Structural, and I am a member of SEOC representing through the continuing education committees, both locally and statewide.
Julie Arthur.
Good morning, Julie Arthur here, Palm Springs Unified School District, also a past CASH chair, and again, representing those schools in K-12.
Thank you. Phil Armstrong.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Phil Armstrong with the Lightfoot Planning Group in Carlsbad. I am on the landscape chair, representing landscape architects in the state.
David Sikota.
Morning, everyone. I apologize. My webcam is not operational, but I'm here with you. I'm with Jensen Hughes, and I am a fire life safety representative.
Steve Taylor.
Steve Taylor with Taylor Engineering, Alameda, California, and I'm the mechanical engineer representative.
Crystal Sujeski.
Good morning, Crystal Sujeski here, representing CAL FIRE, Office of the State Fire Marshal. Good morning.
Susan Riddle.
Hi, I'm Susan Riddle. I represent the California Community College District. I'm with West Valley Mission Community College District.
Jennifer Thornburg.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Thornburg. I'm with the California Geological Survey. I also apologize, I do not have a camera. Thank you.
And Clint Williams.
Good morning, everyone. Clint Williams with Turner Construction. I am representing the general contractors.
And before I get to DSA staff, I do see someone attending with a phone number. I don't know who that is. If you have not been asked to introduce yourself and you're not DSA staff, can you please do so now? Okay. We can start introducing DSA staff. First of all, I'd like to introduce new DSA leadership before we introduce the rest of staff. Joining us, of course, Harlan Raymont, who has the Sacramento Regional Office Manager. Harlan, can you say, can you, it's like, if you speak, you'll actually come on everyone's screen.
Yes. Hi, good morning. I'm Harlan Raymont. I'm Sacramento Regional Office Manager. I've been with DSA for about 10 years, and before that I was in private sector architecture, 18 years specific to K-12 schools.
And Harlan assumed the regional office manager position, replacing Dan Lavarnier, who retired, and you began in March, right, Harlan?
That's correct.
March, okay.
March.
And then I'd like to introduce our headquarters principal structural engineer, Diane Gould.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Diane Gould. I'll do a brief intro like Harlan did. I've been with DSA in the headquarters codes and standards group for about 5 years. I worked at Real Estate Services Division, a different portion of DGS, for a few years prior to that, and the bulk of my engineering experience was working for a private structural consulting firm that did a lot of school projects. So happy to be here, happy to be principal structural engineer. Thank you.
So Diane replaces Jim Hackett, who retired at the end of December. And Diane, you started your tenure as principal structural engineer in March as well?
April, I think it was early April, but yeah.
All right, we are excited to present to you our new principal architect, Eric Dreever.
Hi, everybody. Eric Dreever. I have yet to start. I start actually on Monday, but happy to join you. I guess like Diane and Harlan, I have been with DGS since 2012, and prior to that, I was in the private sector. I come from, like Diane, I come from RESD. Really happy to start.
Thank you, Eric. Eric replaces me and the vacancy I left when I became state architect. So we are happy to have Eric join us on Monday. I especially am happy to have Eric join us on Monday. We also have new supervisors in Sacramento that have been promoted or transferred into new responsibilities since we last met. So I'd like to present Stephen Ito. Is he on the call? I'm not sure actually if we've asked them to actually join us today. Probably not. So I will actually announce all three of them. If they are here, they're welcome to say hello. But I did want to know that many of you interface with our supervisors directly. So I did want to present them. Stephen Ito, if you're on, you could just say hi. Dan Deloche, well, so see, Stephen Ito in Sacramento is now supervising field services. Dan Deloche in Sacramento is moved from project services and now is supervising fire and life safety staff. I'm not sure if Dan is on. And then, of course, Eric Edgman, who has been promoted into project services supervisor. So that is our new supervisory staff in Sacramento. Before we begin our program, did anyone else join us that needs to be introduced while I've been speaking? Okay. Oh, we do have other DSA staff. Sorry. I'm still getting used to this whole, not seeing everyone in the same room. So George Barnes, do you want to introduce yourself, George?
Hello, everybody. George Barnes down here in the corner of your screen. Principal Fire and Life Safety Officer out of headquarters.
And then Laurel, who's our master of ceremonies, I guess I should say.
Hi, I'm the supervisor of the communications and policy team at DSA.
Okay, I'm going down the list. Frank Chia.
Hi, this is Frank at LA office. Today I'm representing Doug Humphrey. Doug is in vacation right now.
Thank you, Frank, for joining us today. Kurt?
Good morning. Kurt Cook, Deputy to the State Architect. I've been deputy here for about 5 years now. Came from the private sector lobbying, and I'm enjoying it.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. I'm going down the list.
Sorry, my phone. Hi, I'm Dsa Rooney, Regional Manager for the Oakland office of DSA, and I've been with DSA 18 years. And prior to that, I worked in the private sector on school projects for about 12 years prior to that.
Thanks, Dsa. And Paul Rooney is joining us today. He is going to be making a little presentation later. Paul?
Good morning, everyone. Paul Rooney here. I work at the DSA San Diego office. I've
think my official title is EPR manager and structural supervisor. Seems like I do a little bit of everything. And so it's nice to see some of you faces again. And I'm happy to talk to you in a minute about one of our items on the agenda. Thanks.
And then our last person, Ryan Turner. Are you on, Ryan?
I think you may have skipped over Derek Shaw. Is he here?
Oh, I did. Sorry, I did. Sorry, Derek. Ryan first, and then I will.
Okay. Ryan Turner, I'm District Structural Engineer with Headquarters Group in the Codes and Standards Unit, and I work out of the San Diego office. I've been with DSA for about 6 years and worked for about 12 years with a consulting firm doing a lot of school projects prior to that. Glad to be here.
And Derek Shaw.
Hi, good morning. I'm Derek Shaw. I'm the supervising architect in the headquarters office, working primarily with accessibility in codes and standards.
Laurel, before we begin the program, I have staff who I may be joining an old link. So if you could communicate with them, they are in the lobby in another meeting. So it may have been the last PSCC meeting link, but I can't communicate with them while I'm talking. So if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
I can't find I don't have the old meeting link.
So maybe just send them a message. It's Tab and Paul and Nikki.
I have the
Paul
old
and Nikki.
meeting link, Laurel. I can send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
That helps.
Or you could just message them with the new link. Thank you.
Or,
All right,
yeah,
so we will get through this technical, actually, it's not technical difficulty. I think it's meeting difficulty, but we'll make it through. So since we last met, we have a new director, Anna Lasso, and she comes from LAUSD in the past. Actually, most recently, she came from the Exposition Park Commission that manages Exposition Park in Los Angeles. Prior to that, she was with LA Unified School District. She is now our director of Department of General Services, and her big goal is to increase collaboration among the departments and also to increase the sustainability of California in alignment with the administration goals. So we are just letting you know we're exploring a lot of programs coming up in the next year. CDE, OPSC, and DSA are looking to do some outreach efforts virtually directly to our schools. We have yet to determine how that will look. We've talked a variety of things, actually having a little bit more of a formal program, or even just having office hours where, 4 times a year, we hold office hours and people can call in and ask us questions directly of DSA, OPSC, and CDE leadership, and we can provide updates on the program. So we are in the process of working that out. So hopefully I'll be able to bring you more information on that next year when we meet. We're also working with other departments like BSC. A lot of our Cal Green initiatives are in collaboration with the non-residential mandatory measure requirements that BSC puts forward. And we know that we're at the point now that the Energy Commission has really, with the 2022 code, has addressed building electrification, which goes a long way to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And now we need to look further into how we can further decarb our buildings, address building decarbonization. And so we're exploring that with them. We'll see what that provides. Obviously, a lot of these goals are more than immediate. They are in planning to address these concerns moving forward, but we are excited about that. And so that meets the director's goals of sustainability, but also our goals of collaboration. We are also exploring additional education and outreach. This past year, we have addressed our Getting to Zero cohort. That culminated in June. We had 58 schools participate, had really great success with that. We are exploring to doing another cohort with our community colleges, hopefully launching early next year, and trying to assist our school districts in developing their sustainability plans so that with each improvement, goals of decarbonization, zero carbon and zero net energy are met. And that requires a plan, a district-wide plan, and we are working with getting them tools in order to address those concerns. And we also just held all electric kitchen of the future webinar. It is on our DSA learning management system. If you did not get a chance to see it, it's there. You can view it live at your leisure. I will tell you, we've had really good results from that as well. We've heard from Frontier Energy that many schools have reached out to them to inquire further about kitchen electrification on their campuses, which is exactly why we want to produce this this education and outreach program, so that we can inspire our schools and get them to targeted resources that work towards zero net energy and building decarbonization. On that, we will go to our starter program, actually. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Our first, hold on a second, I'm going to have to share this or else I have to go to one screen and it's difficult. So I'm going to have to share this where you're not going to see it completely in PowerPoint mode, but you'll see, the slides, but hopefully you can read them okay. All right, DSA has, in order to meet many of our goals, we are doing what we call in some ways an abbreviated CalGreen review. While CalGreen mandatory measures, can everyone see that screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. CalGreen mandatory measures have always been in place. A lot of it is through self-certification. But as we meet our building energy and sustainability goals, we realize that, or decarbonization goals, we realize that there's some measures that need a review. And we have charged staff to do a review of the shade tree requirement and electric vehicle charging requirement. Shade trees and electric vehicle charging go a long way to addressing energy efficiency and also protecting our environment and providing and cooling down the planet, which addresses greenhouse gas emissions. And also acceptance testing. So many of you have heard about this coming in various presentations that DSA has made, but we are now implementing a program. So right now, the shade tree review and the electric vehicle charging review, a little bit more of a formal process, began October 1st, as well as acceptance testing. I just want to let you know that in this review, is reviewing that the project includes this information if it's needed, and I'll explain when it's needed, and ask that documentation be provided if it's not included at intake. Lack of missing requirements will not cause rejection of your project, but you will have a note that says prior to back check, you do need to provide the information. And if it's not provided at intake when it's needed, access compliance review, because they're the architects in the group, will review for completeness and correctness when drawings are submitted for back check. So a little bit about why the importance of shade trees. Trees cool the site and reduce HVAC demand on buildings. Studies have shown that access to nature improves test scores for students. Native tree species do not need a lot of water once established. We get that question a lot. Well, we have water goals. Why are we putting in more landscaping? Trees are actually shown give better bang for the buck when we talk about landscaping, because they provide all these sustainability measures in cooling our planet and also replenishing the air, cleaning the air. So the trees are required to comply with MOLO. It's important that we use native species to the area in which we're planting the trees. So these requirements have been in CalGreen since January 1st, 2017 in the 2016 code. Recently, we have noticed that some projects are not including them, which is why we're actually doing this review. When it comes to electric vehicle infrastructure, that has been also a requirement since the 2016 code, intervening code cycle, I believe, and it aligns with Governor Newsom's order at 7920. Obviously, electric vehicle infrastructure is needed for the future, especially since 7920 indicates that after 2035, gas vehicles will no longer be sold in the state. And so development of the infrastructure is important, and also addresses an equity issue. Having charging at school facilities addresses the ability for individuals who may not have charging at home in apartments to access charging at school when they come to school. These are just, I'm not going to address this in great detail, but these are the code sections that have been in the code related to these two measures and application of other CalGreen measures. But the other CalGreen measures are already very well integrated into our projects. These two are newer, and we've noticed that some of them have been missed. It's important to understand that for shade trees and electric vehicle charging, it does address new facilities. For electric vehicle charging especially, it applies to new parking areas, addition to parking areas, right? Not existing facilities at this time. And the shade trees applies anytime our landscape areas are rehabilitated, and also when it comes to the very large objectives of new requirements to new campuses. So new turf fields, new campuses that have play areas, those and additions to those campuses is when shade trees comes into effect. So a lot of our existing facilities aren't necessarily going to have these measures. Right now, they are not required for a lot of our existing facilities, except for rehabilitated areas for shade trees. But in the future, as we meet a lot of our energy efficiency and decarbonization goals, existing facilities may come into the fold. So I'm actually going to pass this in intent, but really our shade tree requirements as an overview are required in new surface parking areas, new and rehabilitated landscape areas, and new hardscape areas, covering about 20%. Obviously, if you have play fields that are marked and for organized activity, we won't have you put a tree in the middle of a soccer field or a basketball court, but it's important to understand that near buildings, around the perimeter, there's really an opportunity to cool the site, and that's what our goal is. So in our process, so you know and are familiar with it, if it's not provided at intake, this note will get on the drawings, and this note will be provided on the drawings. Again, it won't hold up project submission, but it will be provided on the drawings indicating that we've seen that based on your project that this is required and you've missed it. So prior to back check, please provide this documentation so that we can close out the project. And electric vehicle charging is similar. Right now, only infrastructure is required for new parking areas, additions to parking areas, and it's based on 10% of parking provided. So if when you're adding parking spaces or you have a new parking area, you take the total number of parking, 10% of that is required to have infrastructure, which requires the raceway and panel capacity, does not require the wiring at this time, but it facilitates the installation of chargers in the future, either when they will be required or when a school district chooses to install them. Again, just the infrastructure is required right now. The chargers are not required at this time. Again, so right now, actually, this is an old table that I need to actually change. This says 6% of parking. That was as of July 1st of this year. After July 1st of this year, it has increased to 10. So I just realized that is an error, so I apologize. But again, infrastructure is required in 10% of parking. The way we're going to check for this is that intake will check if it's applicable to your project. If it is, they will provide the note that it needs to be provided, the documentation, prior to clearing back check. It will not hold up project submission. So the last phase of this is acceptance testing. So acceptance testing has been required per the Energy Code since 2005. It's usually performed by the installer or the contractor, and it was up until recently a self-certification process. Energy Commission has determined that either many may not have been performed, or that in order to achieve the goals of the increasing requirements in the Energy Code for HVAC systems and lighting controls compliance, they are now requiring third-party acceptance testing technicians to perform project closeout. So this started October 1st for the entire state. So local jurisdictions are required to check for this as well. The purpose of acceptance testing is to ensure that installed equipment in non-residential buildings is operating as designed and in compliance with the Energy Code. So that's the basic measure. It does include 3 phases. So again, this is third party. The contractors are required to hire certified acceptance testing technicians, which are third-party entities, to come in, and they will do a document inspection, review of the certificates of compliance and certificates of installation. Those are in the drawings. DSA checks that those compliance certificates are in the drawings. And so they will perform that review and then, of course, perform a construction inspection to compare that approved plans meet the actual installation. And then they will perform functional testing specific to the equipment type and the energy code requirements to ensure the controls operate the way they need to and operate the systems effectively. And this ensures that when the owner has a project turned over to them, that they know their systems are working as designed, which increases that obviously optimal energy efficiency operation. What's important for all of you to know in this is that if there are changes in the course of construction, especially to HVAC equipment, controls, lighting controls, anything that's specified, that the documentation that's in the drawings gets updated so that when the acceptance testing technician comes and examines the drawing documentation and the what's installed, that they match up and they have that information ready to them. If they don't, it can delay the process, obviously, of the acceptance testing technician doing their work. So it's important to keep in mind that if there are changes that happen after DSA has approved the construction drawings with HVAC systems, either replacements or changes, that documentation actually gets reviewed by the acceptance testing technician and included in the project so it doesn't delay. When we're talking, I think I covered this. We are starting this as of October 1st, and how we're working on that at DSA is we have basically a demarcating line. If your project has HVAC systems and controls and lighting systems and controls, which obviously most projects have lighting, there will be a note included on the cover sheet that alerts the contractor that third-party testing is required for project closeout. The access compliance team will look and check to make sure that note is there prior to back check. So it's put in place by intake, but there's also a secondary review to ensure that note is still on there. Again, there really isn't anything that needs to be done by the designers. In the submittal process, this is a DSA process to alert the contractor. And we don't want our designers to remove the note. It needs to be on there, and hopefully they will include that in their processes in the future. And then that's the note project that I said. Obviously, for projects prior to October 1st, it still allows contractor to do the self-testing. No third-party testing is required, but projects submitted to DSA and on the approved drawings after October 1st will have this note if they have the systems that need the third-party testing. This is the note that you'll find. You'll see that on your cover sheet, and I won't get through. This just explains a lot of what I've said already. And how in the back end, how we will ensure that this also gets accomplished is our project inspector and assistant inspector duties and performance will be updated. It will be included on the list of documents that the project inspector is required to collect and provide to the owner. Now, there's many of those documentations that don't need to be submitted to DSA, and what's included in that group, like if there's any local health inspections or certain fire requirements, there's certain inspections that documentation doesn't need to come to DSA for certification, but it does need to still occur by the project inspector. So these documents are considered in that realm. So we won't receive the certificates. They don't need to be submitted to us. It won't hold up certification, but we're placing the responsibility on the project inspectors to ensure they're collected so that they can meet the energy code requirements and turn over that documentation to the owner. And so we are training our project inspectors through the training and recertification process on what the certificates mean, how to work with the acceptance testing technician, and what to do at the project closeout to collect those certificates. That's the sustainability presentation that I have. Anyone have any questions regarding this requirement? I kind of went through that quickly, but. No?
So I do, yeah. This is Julie Arthur. I've got a question. So in regard to the shade trees, our district is currently doing a project where we're putting 9 shade trees in it at every elementary. So how will we account for this when our future projects come in that need DSA approval? And showing that these trees were already met and put in ahead of time.
So again, the shade tree requirements, we would only, on an existing campus, we would only be looking at rehabilitated areas. So in the documentation that you submit to DSA, you would indicate on your plans that any area, if you're rehabilitating other parts of the landscape, like either the irrigation or shrubs, you would indicate that this is an existing tree and it already occurs there. We would look at coverage. If you needed to install another, we would tell you you need to install another, but that's how you would accomplish that, because the shade tree requirements at turf areas, if it's rehabilitated, we would look at that. But if it's existing and you're just putting them in right now, it's the Cal Green requirements don't get triggered in that regard, like the 20%, because of the way the scoping works. So any voluntarily installed shade trees don't really meet Cal Green at this time. It's when you come in and you're saying this is a rehabilitated landscape area, we would look at that. But like hardscape areas don't apply to existing campuses. Turf area, it would be if you like totally rehabilitated the entire area, moved up the turf and created a whole new landscape project for that, we would look at that. But if you're just going in and installing trees in an existing turf area, that's not considered a rehabilitated landscape. Does that make sense? I think probably the best way is to, in your project, reach out and get that clarity, project specific, to ensure how Cal Green actually applies.
Okay. All right, it makes sense. It's just, again, these are all going in turf areas, of course. And in the desert here, we really appreciate shade, but there is no native plant that could ever survive here without irrigation. Just putting that in the back of your head.
I understand. So, you know, we do need to meet WALO. So I will just tell you that if you're not doing anything to the main turf area and you're just installing trees, that would not trigger Cal Green requirements of a 20% coverage.
Okay.
For that project, yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If we're already installing them, I need credit for future projects so we don't have to reinstall.
Right. So the requirement is 20% coverage. If the trees are there and they're maintained and they're providing that coverage and you demonstrate that, then there is no requirement to reinstall.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. It's a performance based of coverage. If the trees provide that coverage, then that's not it. That meets the requirement.
Okay.
Other questions?
Hi, this is Jeff Becker. I'd like to just get a clarification on the EV charging requirement. I think I heard you say that it's just the infrastructure at this point. Can you confirm or clarify if there's any requirement as far as who has access to those charging stations? In other words, if it were in a bus facility that the district operated and it wasn't accessible by the public versus accessible by students and staff that come onto campuses. That affects a lot of the grant funding that we end up chasing to install those charging stations.
Right. So I will tell you that the Cal Green requirements, we don't make that direction. We allow the school to determine who has access and who can access. So it's really stipulated in terms of if you're installing a parking area, a certain amount of that parking is required, but who has access to it is determined by the school district. So you can restrict its use to only faculty if you want. You can provide that use to staff. You can restrict use if you don't want it used after hours. We don't dictate the use. We're saying that charging needs to be provided because it's a new parking facility, and the wave of the future is that we will have more and more electric vehicles on the planet. And once you, or actually in the state, I should say, and as those number of electric vehicles increase, you can obviously change the restrictions that you have, right? There's flexibility on that, but we understand that this could provide just access coordination issues in a district. So we don't want to create that and say this must be accessible to students. That's not the goal. The goal is to provide charging. You can determine how who's going to access it and who it's available to.
Thanks, Ida.
This is Buddy Gessel. Just one more question. On the acceptance testing note, is that verbiage or information available on the DSA website so we can get that on our cover sheet prior? And then this was only for projects submitted after October 1st, is that correct?
Correct. For projects submitted after October 1st, if you have HVAC systems and controls and lighting systems and controls, your project will receive the note. It will be as part of the toolkit in Bluebeam. So our hope is that we're trying to catch that now, in the sense of if they haven't come in, we're going to put it on. But it is our goal that in the future, it will be part of something that the architect provides, and we'll just check for it.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Ida, this is Fred over at Citrus. Just
Yeah.
a quick question tagging on to what Buddy said. For the acceptance testing, is there a protocol for the individual or the company for competency that does it, or can it just be any commissioning agent?
It is a certified acceptance testing technician that has been certified by the Energy Commission, and they have over 300 certified, and the numbers are growing. So they had to actually reach 300 certified individuals before they could make it a requirement. And so they have over 300 certified lighting technicians now, and over 300 certified HVAC testing technicians now. And
Awesome.
they come
Thank
from
you.
the database, and that's who they hire.
Thank you.
Ida, this is Crystal. I have a question regarding the installation of trees for shade structure. Is there any thought or consideration of the wildland aspect and crowning potential?
We probably need to discuss that further. I will tell you that there is other opportunities to meet the requirement, and that is with shade structures, but there's also fire concerns with that. Our goal with the shade trees is really to have an additional measure to cool the site. So if a parking lot has PVs, they don't need to install shade trees, right? As long as the PVs meet a 20% coverage of cooling the site. If there's shade structures that are already on campus, they cool the site in those areas. You subtract those areas, and then there are shade trees. But in the sense of having it project specific where it may pose an issue, they would need to work with DSA. So we would just need to know where those are. The requirements are prescriptive in that regard, but because they're DSA initiated in regulation for schools and they only apply to schools, this is not a requirement that's required for the rest of non-residential construction, because local jurisdictions already have shade tree requirements for parking areas, and schools aren't subject to local jurisdiction. So this is our way of meeting those requirements for those large expanses of asphalt areas in the state that schools have oftentimes. So if at a local issue, if that in a local requirement, there's an issue with shade trees because of fire concerns, DSA can take those into consideration. We would look at that project by project.
Thank you.
Hey, Ida, this is Phil. Just to segue onto Crystal's point, we've been, at least San Diego County has been very aggressive on the urban wildland interface. So we've often been subject, at least even though it's not going through municipal reviews, I think thoughtful siting of shade and canopy in relation to clearance of buildings, and then setbacks into where native and brush could ignite, so we don't have the ladder fuels. But basically, I think we've been subject just to a more thoughtful location of shade canopy.
And really, just so you know, it's not, the performance requirement is to consider the aggregate square footage minus any kind of play areas, right? So once you start eliminating the square footage of soccer fields and the square footage of basketball courts and the square footage of that 20%, it's not 20% that includes that. You actually remove that component. The 20% actually does start to get a little bit reduced, but it still starts to add a shade tree component for site benefit. And so our goal is to not dictate where they go. It's really more to ensure that trees are provided. If there obviously are better locations for that in meeting the requirements, we will look and work with you on that. We don't want to create other hazards in doing this. We can accommodate this where it's reasonable. Okay, any other questions?
Yes, Ida, can you share the sustainability presentation with members?
Absolutely. I did see a couple errors, so I will correct it, but we will share all this with you after the fact. In fact, some of our presenters do have their own slides. We will receive them, compile it, and send it out to you all so that you have it. If there aren't any other questions on the shade trees, I am going to send it over to Paul Rooney, who will discuss a new process for back check. Paul, you can share your screen. I'm going to get out of mine.
Sure. Okay, I just shared my screen. Everybody see it okay? Okay. So I was invited here today because Craig and Doug both decided to take vacations. And I was the third part of the group that there was probably 5 or 6 of us that kind of led a lot of discussions on trying to change things when it comes to back check, make some improvements, find ways to make things better, right? So I was the third man down, and so here I am. And so for those of you who don't know me, I introduced myself in the beginning, but so I was involved heavily with the development of our electronic plan review process, which it's been 3 years since we started. October in 2018, we started that business, and I'm grateful that we did because it sure helped us move along when COVID hit us a year and a half into it, right? I don't know where we would have been. We would have been shipping drawings around and having them quarantined and what have you. But I think that electronic plan review has basically allowed us to explore different things when it comes to back check, right? We were hoping to do this a little earlier in life, but we got hit by COVID and we had to come up with ways to work remote and do check through the Teams meeting, Microsoft meetings, Microsoft Teams meetings, what have you. But we've been tinkering around with this for quite some time. About a year ago, I proposed some changes to senior management, and there was some chatter about it, and LA had some strong opinions on trying to get some consistency statewide. So we pulled them in to kind of help navigate through this idea of changing the new back check, right? And so I've been with DSA for 14 and a half years now, and my first, I guess, 12 years, I guess 11, whatever, up until we started this electronic plan review, I was in the back check room all the time, right? And lots of people in the back check room, sometimes, people just standing there watching me go through the drawings, making, checking to see things, they made updates from the initial submittal to what I requested during the plan review. And then a lot of people standing around waiting their turn, right, to jump in the conversation. So I think that what we're proposing here is will help eliminate that, right? And so let's look at my slide here. So, and I'll get into more detail on this. And I actually only have one slide here, and so it's pretty straightforward, but I'll get into more details that's not shown in the slide, just so you can kind of give a better sense of what's going on with it, and then you can give me some feedback on what you think. So first of all, what is the back check? We basically review the final plans to make sure that the design professional has incorporated the responses to DSA's plan review. Okay. And historically, that's been done face-to-face in the back check rooms at the regional offices until we got hit with COVID. Then it got switched to a virtual environment using Microsoft Teams. But still, to me, Microsoft Teams is an in-person meeting, right? We're getting together and we're going through the stuff together, what have you. So the proposed change is to break the back check up into 2 phases. The phase 1 would be a desk review, where we don't have the interaction with the design team. The design professional would basically provide written responses to each of the comments in the Bluebeam, using the Bluebeam tools and the reply to command, incorporate the comments, update the drawings, provide it to us, and they would respond to all disciplines comments. So all required disciplines, they would have given responses to. And then we would, at our desk, go and do our review, independent of the design team, and see what we could do to get through the plan, get through all the back check as much as we can, right? And then we move to the second phase, which was basically how we've been doing it since DSA has been around, right? Is the in-person interactive with the design team. And so just to give you how it would work, basically, so at the end of the plan review, DSA plan reviewers would estimate how much back check time they would need, right? And we've updated eTracker, so our plan reviewers have a place to document this, our internal eTracker. They can document how much time they estimate. And so then the design professional will call and say, hey, it's time to schedule back check. DSA, the design professional, will basically agree on a submittal date based on availability and who's around and if there's people on vacations, what have you. And then they will also, DSA will agree on a completion date. Say, hey, we're going to be done on this date. And then they will send an email off to the design professional documenting when they're supposed to submit it and when they will, and when the completion will be done. And we're in the process of updating eTracker internally so we can document some of this stuff and we know what's coming down the pipe and when it's supposed to show up. And so we have things that will show up on our dashboard saying, hey, it's time to go look for this submittal, go process it. And then when we're done, things that remind us, hey, you got to be done on this date, completion dates, trying to keep the system rolling, and that it can also be overseen by supervisors and management. And then we basically notify, okay, so we'll send a notification saying, hey, this is the submittal date, time, and the completion date. And then DSA will look for those documents to come in. Once it comes in on that submittal date, they will, well, the design professional, like I said, mentioned, they'll be responsible for providing written responses and incorporating all the comments. And then on the day of the submittal, the lead planner will go and they'll go into the Bluebeam, get the documents that have been submitted, right? And they'll do a back check readiness to make sure we're good to move forward. Have they incorporated all the comments? Have they provided written responses to all the comments? And then have they prepared the new drawings properly? If they haven't, then they'll be told, hey, we got to reschedule this because you got to take care of these items before we move forward, right? And then all required disciplines, once we get through that back check readiness phase, all required disciplines shall do the review. Once they're done, we'll notify the design professional, hey, we're done. If we get done before anticipated or before the scheduled completion date, we'll let you know. And then we're on to the phase 2, right? Ideally, everything's been addressed properly in that first phase 1 and we're stamping it out. But if not, then we're going to be, then we're going to be having to schedule another back check, and this will be the in-person format, the one we are also familiar with. And so one of the things I think this will accomplish is, as I mentioned before, is less standing around, right? Waiting your turn to jump in and weigh in on a particular item. It'll, developing a process. Since this is kind of with COVID, there's a little bit of mixture of different offices doing different things, or even different plan reviewers doing different things. This will get consistency statewide so that we're all have provided these marching orders to do it this way. And so you guys will know what to expect from everybody because we're all doing it the exact same way. So that'll help. And ideally, what I would also like to see is the design professional between the phase 1 and the phase 2, they actually make their corrections in the native file rather than making it in the Bluebeam session environment. Because there's too many times we come through and we do our plan review and design professionals are correcting stuff in person in the Bluebeam studio environment, plugging things in and putting new images in and what have you. But then they never go back and they don't correct their native file. And then the problem is they come back during a revision or an addendum and stuff, and we say, oh, that stuff's still lingering there. It's like, oh, come on, really? So I think that gives an opportunity for the design professional to get closer to a cleaner set before we start pasting stuff on and making the corrections in that studio environment. So that's one of the things I see the benefit of heading down this path. And ultimately, it's less time the design team standing around waiting for their turn to address something. But I must say, I really do enjoy. I know we haven't had a back check room experience in a long time because of COVID, but I do enjoy the back check room where I'm meeting with people, I'm talking with people, I get to have that interaction. I think that is a part of the success of DSA and you guys is because we have relationships with you, right? I mean, I know Buddy, I know people that come into the office, right? And that makes us who we are. And so I think that phase 2 will still be that. It'll be just less, right? We'll get to see less of you, Buddy, instead of more, right? Or whoever it is, whoever the design team. I'm seeing Buddy's face right here. And I think hopefully this doesn't move us away from having that relationship, right? And ideally, I would love the in-person to be back in person in the back check room because you do have that interaction, right? But reality, we've had a lot of success with this team's environment. And I don't think DSA wants to drag you down to have you drive whatever distance it is, right? To clear out a couple comments, right? And so there needs to be, some things we're working on there to try to make sure it works for all. But ultimately, they'd love to see you back in DSA eventually. And so the next steps for us, I'd love to hear you guys' feedback and your comments on what we're thinking here, right? This would be great to hear from you. If not right at this moment, if you can feel free to reach out to me independently, that is fine too. We're targeting making this happen in the first quarter of 2022, right? And we're in the middle of updating some procedures. We've sent those procedures to internal staff to try to get their feedback because it's a big change for them, to everybody. We sent to all DSA planners, hey, so what do you guys think of this, right? So we've collected that information. Now we're going to kind of go through it and get their see what we can do to tweak it to get some happiness from everybody. And then I'm working on getting some e-tracker development along, because I really think having a tool that tells us what to do, when to do it, reminds us that something's coming in, it has a lot to do with our success, right? And so I want to get that piece incorporated too, hopefully before we roll it out. But if not, we'll that's kind of sometimes out of our control when we're working with the different state agency to develop stuff. They can be slow, as you know, the state. And so hopefully we get there. But that's the plan. So I'll open it up here to any questions or comments or feedback to what we're trying to do here.
Hi, Paul. David Skoda with Jensen News. I have a question or two. And again, just thinking out loud here, I guess my initial concern is that we would be setting up a system that anticipates at least 2 back checks. So first question is, if plan review comments are successfully addressed during the phase 1 desk review, is the phase 2 in person, will that still be required? And then I think what we want to avoid here is creating a system where design professionals automatically anticipate, oh, there's going to be 2 back checks. We didn't get that on back check 1, but we'll get it on back check 2. So I'd like to hear your feedback on that.
Yes. So I would say, so if you get it done in the phase 1, that's great. We don't need a phase 2, right? We're moving on. So that answers the first question, right? And that's ideally what we want. But the reality is DSA is probably going to find something else, right?
Yeah.
Related to whatever, or it expands, or you guys didn't quite understand what we're after, right? Especially obviously for the bigger projects, right? And then as far as the design professionals using that second back check or knowing there's another opportunity, I think they already may do that now. And so it's a little bit of, we got to work with you guys. We got to recognize that. So we do have this back check readiness, and we do have the ability to say, hey, we're in the middle of this review, and we can say, hey, you're not quite there, right? You're not ready to have this back check. We're going to stop here. And for me, when I'm in the back check room with you guys, I'm a lot more willing to try to make it work because you're standing there with me. It's like, oh my gosh, I'll just try to muscle through this right. If I'm at my desk, it's gonna be a lot easier to kick you out, right? Yeah. So you're not there, right? And hopefully that leads to that the next time you go around and it's coming back into DSA, that you take it more seriously, or you try to get everything done, right? Ideally, hopefully the fact that you're spending less time at DSA in our back check room going through this stuff, you're spending more time getting ready for these back checks for the next back or whatever it may be, right? And so the overall you spend more time, your time is more valuable spent correcting stuff rather than standing around waiting for us to ask you a question of something that we may not need. We may need one little question an hour or something, right? So yeah, but it is a concern. And one of my other concerns is that DSA is going to do, from the other's perspective, is DSA is going to do a second plan review on it, right? They can say, oh, well, I didn't cover this during the first one. I'm going to just save this because I know I'm going to get a phase 1 review where I get to make my comments again, right? And that's where we need to say, hey, we need to, our supervisors and management need to step in and say, we're not doing that, right? We complete our review. That's not the path we're heading down, right? But if we do head down that path, the design professional needs, you guys will let us know, right? You got to bring it up the chain, right? To the supervisors and the management, say, hey, this is what's happening, and we will have to squash it and try to control it, right? But good questions, David.
Yeah,
hey, Paul, this is Jeff Becker, K-12 Schools. Looking at this from an owner's perspective, can you address the time frame of this process as compared to the current process? My question being, as an owner, we're leaning on our architects to get quality plans submitted, at original submittal, right? And then we're pressuring them, encouraging them to meet the back check date. How does this play out with a desk review and then a potential in-person review of the back check comments? Would that second review be scheduled automatically when they submit those plans so that we're not extending the time frame of the overall review process?
That's a very good question. So I would then that is a concern, right? So that is one of our, it may take a little longer, right? For sure, because you do have 2 cycles going through, right? But so we will, I mean, so when it gets scheduled, right, we will commit to a time that we're going to be done, right? And we will say we're going to be done on this date, right? And we'll commit to that, and we'll shuffle people around to be done with that when we have to, right? And then we will, right after that, you'll be able to schedule another back check, the in-person one. And even probably before that, if you know that there's going to be a second in-person back check, depending on the scope of the project, right? You can schedule it out, say, hey, no, we need to get this in person in place, right? And so we will lose time there. So the design team will be able to, it's in the Bluebeam Studio environment, so they'll be able to watch us during the phase 1 review to see what's going on, see where the questions are, and they can start trying to, we want them to stay out of the session because we want to be able to do the whole, get from beginning to end, go from everything being red when we send it to you incorporating it into to us, you basically turning to green, the design professionals, and then we go in and we either change it back to red, or we may add a new red comment, or we close it out. But we want to get all the way through it, right? But so they can monitor what's happening, right? They can see the comments and they can start getting ready to address them for the second go around. So hopefully that helps things move along a little bit, but it is a good question. For sure, and something we got to think about and make sure we don't slow it down too much. Ideally, we get better products coming in. If they've given us good, so right now, a lot of times what happens in the back check room is even when the design team's there, they won't remember what the answers were, right? And if they have given us written responses prior to showing up, we get to look at the written responses and we get to, at our desk to go through it, right? So hopefully there's some more thought and more preparation by the design team when they're putting things together. So ultimately, I hope it all smooths out and it makes it better for everybody.
Hey, Paul, Buddy Gals with the DLR Group, Wiki. I like the proposed change. We kind of informally went through it on a project, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months ago, where the plan checker had already done some desk review. And when we showed up on the teams, everything was taken care of and we were signed off with that discipline in the matter of minutes. So as long as the design professionals are responding, to the comments with information that allows the plan checkers to sign it off quickly without a lot of back and forth, and everything is updated on the drawings, I think it can expedite the process ultimately.
Yeah, I think we can have some good results for sure.
Yeah.
Appreciate the feedback on that. That's good. I know there's been tinkering around with it once we started talking about this, and some of the plan reviewers have been doing this a little bit of this, right? We just want to get them all on the same page, the same way. So consistency, because you can't expect that from every situation right now, buddy. Even though you liked that one, like, oh, why can't you do on the next one, right? We're not quite there yet. Hopefully we get there soon.
Understood.
Yeah, Eric Swenson here. Got one comment on the Bluebeam process. As a geotechnical engineer, we're not involved in the Bluebeam day-to-day interactive sessions at all. And sometimes we have comments that come back, like someone will have reviewed our geotech report. They got a few questions here and there. They'll have these comments. And oftentimes I'll see these comments come back as somewhat incomplete sentences and not really formulated as a clear question, needing a clear response. So if you have some way of, especially for those design professionals who are not in there all the time, interactive with the back checkers, it'd be nice that if you need something from us, please formulate your questions, comments in complete sentences and in clear questions that we can respond to.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. Yeah, you always have the option, if you're not clear on the comment, to reach out to the plan reviewer and say, hey, what did you mean here, right? And the reality is we're all engineers. A lot of us are engineers, some are architects. Architects are probably better at writing than us engineers. That's not my strength. That's why I became an engineer. I can draw pictures and stuff. So
I mean I can interpolate and like I say,
My suggestion is don't be afraid to reach out, right?
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to loop the supervisor in too, so that they know the next time, hey, we can look a little closer at these at the plan reviewers' comments to make sure they are clear, right? And as we develop our tool chest and our comments over and over with this Bluebeam environment, we will get cleaner, better comments that are kind of more set standards, right?
Yeah, I seem to be getting similar comments across. I do a lot of solar stuff, and so in these pre-check design process, I'll see the same set of questions coming back time after time. It helps me. I understand I'm going to be asked this question, so then I'm fixing up my report for the next time. And
gotcha. Yeah. As long as you make the change, so the next time,
right?
Then it helps, right? Some people will try to push it through exactly the same the next go around, and it's we got to rehash it all again, right? But on your guys' end, if you can, lessons learned, right?
Lessons learned.
Exactly. But we'll find something else wrong with it. Don't worry. That's what we do. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, great. Well, thank you for letting me crash this party. It's always fun when Craig leaves and I get shoved into something like this.
I realized that I was on mute. So sorry. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. I was saying, don't say we'll find something else. We're not there to reiterate the process over and over again. But thank you for that presentation. We are a bit behind on schedule, but we will try to get everything in. I need to know, does everyone need a break or should we move ahead? I guess we could
press on.
Press on? Everyone's free to press on. Okay, sounds good. That way we can recover some time. All right, so now I'm going to share my screen again. And we are going to discuss a little bit of what we have going on with our modernization of existing buildings task force. We've had a lot of questions that have arisen from this program that we're moving ahead with to address rehabilitation cost threshold, the 50% valuation threshold. And so we're here today to provide a little bit of clarity as to our plan to address this issue. So for all of you, a little bit of an overview. We have seen a numerous amount of buildings coming in that are achieving the 50% valuation cost threshold when an existing building is modernized that requires an analysis of that building structurally. And where we used to see it maybe twice a year, we're now seeing probably up to 10 a month. And so we know in some areas. And so we know that once we're having to have this analysis over and over and over again, that there's a problem that needs to be addressed. And so we're trying to attack this problem in the next rulemaking cycle. I do want to set up expectations that our goal is to get to a mutually beneficial result for everyone in this existing buildings task force process. But as a task force and as our goals exist, a lot of the information comes about as we proceed. And so my goal here today in addressing this issue is to give you an overview of the plan to address the issues until we have a change in regulation, and to set a little bit of expectations in what we plan on doing moving forward and hopefully arrive at a beneficial result. So the intent, of course, this task force is to evaluate changes to regulations that ensure when a financial investment is made in a modernization that safety standards are addressed. That's the purpose of the regulation that we have. That's our goal. We're still wanting to keep that intent even in the change in regulation. I've already stressed the problem. Of course, the problem for DSA is that we're not cost estimating specialists. We get different formats on an analysis. Right now in EB4, there's 4 ways to demonstrate what the project cost is, that we provide that to determine whether or not the structural analysis is triggered. And of course, for all of you, it's difficult to plan your projects when you're having this 50% threshold 3 years in advance and you don't know how costs are going to affect it. So our goal is to have a better planning process that prioritizes safety for students and ensures project modernization goals are preserved while ensuring sustainability and resiliency. And what we mean by sustainability and resiliency is that We don't want to have you to force you to demolish your buildings. That's not a sustainable concept, right? We'd like for the rehabilitation to occur. So how can we have that happen in some kind of measured process as opposed to perhaps an all or nothing process? And then resiliency and understanding that anything that we do to our existing buildings should be from that lens due to impending disasters that happen all the time, fire, earthquakes, all this. So our plan is to implement an interim plan that establishes a fair and reasonable construction cost per square foot. And then our second half is to meet a task force of representative stakeholders to explore changes in regulation to meet the goal. So in discussing a little bit about our first plan, the interim plan, I'm going to offer Kurt an opportunity to discuss our process to hire a cost estimating consultant. And this will take us to whenever a regulation may come into effect. The earliest would be August of 2023. Go ahead, Kurt.
Sure. Thank you, Ida. Good morning. I'm going to give them a little background because we didn't talk about, as Paul Rooney said, we're always trying to help, and sometimes there's an unintended consequence. And if you didn't know, this past June, we reissued IREB 4 for the rehabilitation required by costs. And after that implementation, we heard from a lot of our stakeholders that there was an unintended consequence of that. And so we quickly rescinded that and reissued the previous IR, which stands right now. And that takes us to where we're at today with trying to look at how we implement a new IR that is responsive to what is going on for the school districts and takes into consideration sufficient advance notice to implement the changes that are required and the length of time for you to plan a modernization project without impacting your completion. So that, that is our goal. And so what we have done is we put together requests for proposals from outside contractors who are specifically in the cost estimating business. As Ida said, we are not cost estimators. And so we're looking for cost estimators to respond to our RFP who can give us data sets for California following the things that we look for in the climatic, geographic, topographic areas that are reflective of all the building environments across California, so that we can get apples to apples comparisons, so that when we're moving forward with a cost estimate, it's fair to the districts, and it's reflective of what's really going on. And so that's the first step in the RFP. The second step is developing templates, as the second bullet points out, that you can use, that we'll use as well, and we arrive at the same spot. So, that we're in agreement on the cost of replacement is so critical to the success of the IR itself. So that is our main goal, and then we'll provide the analysis of the project costs for replacement value for specified projects. And I see you're typing. Do you have a specific on that one?
Yeah, sorry, I just realized that was misspelling. Ideally, until the templates are developed, we may have some questions as to the cost estimates that are presented. In other words, we'll have the cost estimated consultant available. And our goal with the templates is to have a uniform process so that when we're looking, we're always looking at it kind of at the same tool set, right? And it assists DSA in that, but also if there's something that seems off or is a discrepancy, we have them to consult with and provide guidance on an estimate that's submitted so that we could have a third set of eyes on it, I guess I should say.
And I should also point out additionally that these estimates would be based on the 4 DSA regions as well. And then the final item there is that we would retain the consultant to participate and assist us during the regulatory amendment, the code development process for Title 24. And I think that covers it. I mean, I can get into the dirty details of an RFP, but I think you all understand that. I think we've it's short and sweet. No need to belabor an issue unless you have questions.
Yeah, and we realize that we have consultants that we have now to do our plan review work when we're busy. We're probably of the realization that maybe we need a cost estimating consultant for the ongoing. Our goal here is to establish an interim cost, but maybe the regulation change will require us to still have that cost value updated periodically. So while we're saying this is an interim plan, it's an interim plan till we figure out what the regulations require. But it may be that moving forward, we do need to hire cost estimating and have one that assists DSA moving forward. I'm going to work on present the task force component of it now, and then maybe we can take questions on all of it so you can get the larger picture. So in the past, we've created task forces in the access team for access development rulemaking that have worked very well. And so we're using that model. And what does a task force mean? When we have a problem that we're presented with, and I'll give you an example, electric vehicle charging station accessibility. Federal requirements don't have one. Access team was required to come up with accessibility requirements absent federal standards. So how do we do that? And we need to inform ourselves of all the stakeholders and what's needed. So essentially a task force is a representative group of stakeholders to which they're willing to work on a specific problem in detail. We come to the task force. It is selected by DSA from people who have indicated interest. In other words, we don't say, hey, will you join us? We say, are you interested in participating and doing the work? Because it will take work. And from who we garner interest, we will select representative people. Our goal is to have maybe a dozen people that are representative of who are affected by this change and very broad-based and work with us on the problem. So this is not necessarily an engagement like the PSCC where you are a conduit for reaching your larger audience. It really is that I have experience with this problem and I can provide a direct response as to your questions. DSA proposes questions to this group really on a fact-finding mission. What is your planning process? You represent a large school district. How do you plan for the existing regulation is an example. What problems do you see that you think should be addressed? What do you see as a good idea that DSA could do? It's really fact-finding. It's not any more than that. It's an exploratory group. And so our goal is to convene about 2 to 4 meetings over 6 months. This is pre-cycle to have that engagement. Initially, 1 or 2 meetings. First will be the exploration stage. Then DSA comes back, formulates kind of an outline of regulations, and then we could bring it back to the task force and test it and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And our goal is after the first 6 months, we have the bones and the outline of a process to move forward, to which we actually write regulatory text. And then the pre-cycle, our normal pre-cycle outreach to the general public and all our stakeholders occurs. But the task force really informs the way forward, right? A lot of times DSA, our regulations, we understand when there's a problem and it's a problem we can easily solve because it's not necessarily something that is as complex as perhaps this regulation is. So that's the process of a task force. I will say that the task force does not direct DSA. The task force informs DSA. DSA makes the decisions as to the regulatory, what we actually proceed with in regulatory development, but it is an opportunity to inform. And so it is a reiterative process until those 6 months are done. And that's what we're looking for. It is different than the PSCC because while all of you are representative stakeholders, we bring information to you that's very broad-based, and we don't want to tax you with this information if you can't directly contribute in that sense. So there may be some PSCC members that are on the task force. There may be others that are not. If we find that there's a stakeholder who has not volunteered or stakeholder group, we will then go out and search for someone to be on that group. But originally, we really would like people who have indicated interest because it is a working group and we want people to work in that manner. Before we raise questions on this, I'm going to turn this over to Diane, who's going to discuss the schedule of how we're going to apply this so you know when that time frame occurs of the engagement. Diane?
Thank you. Making sure I am off mute here. Thanks, Ida. So you can see on the slide on the screen that shows what will be our intervening code cycle rulemaking schedules. As you may already be aware, our building code runs on a triennial cycle every 3 years, but we also have the intervening cycle, which cuts it right in the middle, 18 months. That actual cycle, well, we call it the pre-cycle work, is going to start in June of 2022. The task force that Ida was describing, we would be targeting to have meetings occurring sometime between January 2022 and concluding by June 2022. Not quite sure yet how many meetings, probably at least 2, probably no more than 4 is realistic within that time. But based on the results of the meetings, we would put together our package for the intervening rulemaking cycle. And you can see that pre-cycle work between June and January, those 6 months, is when we do our outreach to all our stakeholders before we actually do our initial submittal to BSC. So that involves presenting it before this body, just like we did with our triennial package this year. We also outreach to many stakeholder groups, including SEOC, AIA, CASH, ACIA, and our labs. We also usually have a public meeting where we go through and present all of our proposed rulemaking for that package, and that would occur somewhere towards the end of 2022. Once we get through that process, we have our initial submittal to BSC that occurs in February, and then there are a number of opportunities for more public participation before it gets adopted by the BSC. Sometime between February and March, we have our Code Advisory Committee meetings, so that's an opportunity for the public to weigh in as well. We have our public comment period, which is the formal written submittal opportunity that's targeted to occur sometime between March and May. And then the final meeting where the package would be adopted and approved would be August of 2023. And as Ida pointed out, the effective date when we're talking about our existing building regulations, because those are in our admin code for part 1, that part is treated differently than the rest of the parts of Title 24. So it goes into effect 30 days after the Building Standards Commission adopts it, and it's recorded with the Secretary of State. So that's, she mentioned earlier in her presentation, if there were changes to the admin code, existing building provisions, that would go into effect of September 2023, whereas the rest of the Title 24 goes into effect 180 days after publishing. So that is July of 2024. Any questions on that?
Any questions on the process? I do want to clarify that as with when we begin and we don't have an idea of what any of this looks like, it does need to go to the process. It does need to go through a public process. And if we don't arrive at a solution, we just continue into the next code cycle and try to look at it again. Our goal is to target August of 2023, but obviously as we proceed through the process, it involves everyone's cooperation. We don't want to create regulations that are contentious for everyone because then they won't get approved. And our goal is to arrive at regulations for approval of August at 2023. But setting an expectation, we normally don't delay, but I do want to say that we want to do this cautiously and something that works and hopefully works for everyone and hopefully is good for the environment, good for our schools, good for the safety of our kids. Any questions with regard to this process? Okay.
This is Fred. I just have one addition to that on the outreach. Should probably add in CCFC as well.
Okay. I will do.
Where no one's ever going to want to renovate. No one's ever.
Ida, this is Crystal. I was wondering, with the selection process of hiring a cost estimator, what is the criteria? Like, what are their qualifications? And will that be discussed in the task group?
Not in the task force because the criteria is, we're working on getting that in place right now. We have required that they have done school construction and demonstrate projects of where their philosophy, how they approach it, that they've done school construction projects of different varieties as part of the qualifications process. Right now, that contract is in review with our contracting folks at Office of Business Administration Services. We've done the overview of it. They're doing their analysis of it, but the task force is kind of independent of the cost estimator. It's really, we're trying to get the cost estimator on board in advance so that we can get a per square foot construction cost that's valid for the interim. But there are requirements for that. They demonstrate their ability to do this work.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So if any of you are interested in being on the task force, please send your name to Kurt. His email will be included in all our communications, and once I send the slides out, I'll include it directly, and the group or the focus that you would be able to represent. Obviously, you all represent a constituency group here. We would like to know what that constituency group is and the options if you represent more than one, so that we can develop a balanced task force in moving forward with this. Okay, looks like we are back on time. So again, I just want to check on still moving forward, no break. We're good? Okay. We are now going to go to just our rulemaking update. I know we've discussed a little bit about rulemaking here. We've discussed a little bit about our existing rules when I did the sustainability presentation. I will say that prior to giving you our update right now, that we are beyond our public comment periods for most of our packages. And that engagement process is really when we need your participation and your questions. So understand that our rulemaking process is a public process, and there's an opportunity to provide that public comment so we can improve through pre-cycle, as Diane mentioned in the calendar here, and also in the public comment process. That's the way we improve our regulations before they get adopted. So we do encourage your engagement. A little bit about our access rulemaking. Our public comment period just ended September 26th, and we don't have a large package today. Probably the most, a lot of our regulations this time are clarifying. The one that's probably creating the most interest or questions or comments, I should say, is how we're clarifying not accessible means of egress, but how we're clarifying separating requirements for exits separate from entrances to provide greater clarity, and then also clarifying that at stairwells, doors that are not a part of an accessible means of egress do not need to meet the accessible door requirements of 11B404. The details are in the proposal. That really affects multi-story facilities, not so much single-story facilities. That's really the one that's probably the one that has the most comments that we've received. Everything else really is a clarifying requirement that hasn't created or stirred a lot of comment. But there is still an opportunity. So these provisions will be proceeding to the BSC adoption meeting, which occurs sometime in December or January. There is an opportunity at that time to also make comment, but the public comment period has closed for the writing questions and comments portion. Now the only time to make comment on this will be at the commission meeting, and that's directed by building standards of that date. I will address Cal Green now, and then I'll have the others address the other rulemaking parts that DSA does. So a little bit on Cal Green. We do have a 15-day comment period that begins yesterday, till October 28th. We're clarifying just some terminology in the CO2 monitors sensors provision, but our package consists of clarification on shade tree requirements. While we had covered the omission of playfields in the original shade tree package, we did omit it on the hardscape areas, and so we know that we don't want trees in the middle of your basketball court. So while we're effectively enforcing this now, because obviously it's impossible to put a shade tree in your basketball court, we are clarifying that in the rulemaking so that it is in the regulations. So that's the clarification on shade tree requirements. The requirements for CO2 monitors in new K-12 classrooms are really an opportunity to have those monitors that are not integrated into economizers and emergency management systems, or those facilities that don't have that. If they are upgrading those facilities, that they install a CO2 monitor so that the indoor air quality can be monitored by the teacher and alert facility management if there's a problem. Most of the CO2 monitors will already be integrated into economizers and into systems. So this is just an added measure, and it probably doesn't affect a significant amount from what's already being done. But it is important to recognize that a lot of our existing facilities, if they're being monitored and HVAC systems aren't in effect, that this is a critical component to maintaining that indoor air quality, because studies have shown in the past that it has been a problem in schools. And also with COVID, it's important to preserve the indoor air quality. The big package that we have moving forward is our electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We align our provisions with Building Standards Commission for non-residential construction. There will be a jump from 10% of spaces to 20% of spaces. Again, this affects only new parking facilities right now, in addition to parking areas, not existing facilities, but chargers will be required to be installed if these provisions are approved in January, December, which would be of the 20% of spaces that have EV infrastructure, 25% are required to have chargers installed. That's a big, because right now we're only at infrastructure, the installation of chargers will be required. Again, the EV provisions right now, those are no longer open for public comment because the only 15-day comment period are on the regulations that we're correcting, or clarifying, which is CO2 monitors. But there is an opportunity at the Building Standards Commission meeting in December, January to comment on the EV package. If you want the information, there's the link here and you can read the proposal as it moves or as we are presenting it to the Building Standards Commission. And again, for this rulemaking cycle, the regulations are effective January 1st, 2023 if they are approved. While we do not author any energy code regulations, Energy Commission does, I do want to let you know that their regulatory requirements were approved in June and they will become effective January 1st, 2023. It goes a long way to building electrification, and it changes the energy budgets and the process of energy budgets for the performance method and gives credit to electrification. Presently in the code, you get benefit for gas. That is flipped on its head, and now they are giving credit for, or increasing credit for, electrification. So it requires heat pump technology for water heating and HVAC systems. If you do use fossil fuels, you will need to beef up your building envelope in order to meet the performance budget, energy budgets. And for the first time, photovoltaics and battery storage will be required for buildings. Again, these have already been approved. They do need to go to the Building Standards Commission, but the Building Standards Commission really ensures the process of rulemaking was covered. It is the Energy Commission that approves the regulations, but you do still have an opportunity to comment at the Building Standards Commission in December, January on the new energy code regulations. And I provided the link here so you can read those as well. I'm now going to go to George, who will cover what's coming up with fire regulations. George, let me get out of this. Okay, you can share your screen, George.
Hopefully everybody can see that.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about some new and updated IRs. And we do have IR 9-2, which has been posted to the website. It pertains to carbon monoxide detection requirements for Group E classrooms and the Group I4 occupancies. As you can see here, this was issued back in July. This was developed after a couple of years of hearing numerous comments and complaints about the system and the process and the requirements and the clarifications. I think it's important to understand that the carbon monoxide detection requirements are a model code requirement in the IBC and the IFC, which were adopted by the Office of the State Fire Marshal. So these regulations were not written by DSA or by the State Fire Marshal's Office. The amendments in Section 915 for carbon monoxide pertain to addressing certain statutory requirements, and that will be the italicized language that you would see in 915. But again, that has to do with statutory requirements that the State Fire Marshal's Office has to include in this regulation when they adopted it. Another new one was IR 31-1 for the construction of freestanding and open-sided shade structures. Again, in trying to establish consistency amongst the design community and the plan review side for DSA to ensure that the guidance on installation and the materials being used and the placement and location of these shade structures is commensurate with code requirements. As you all know, the code does not specifically use the term shade structure, so it can kind of mean anything depending on what your intent is in the design. So we're trying to put something in writing that will help everybody move forward with these quicker through the plan check process and get these erected for you and your plans approved. Updated, no change in intent of the language in IRF1, but IRF1 has merely been redesignated as IR91. So for those of you who like to download our IRs and keep them, you'll find that you may have one with an incorrect number on it. I always recommend to people that rather than downloading them, always go to the website and review the document. That way you're assured of getting the most current version, and hopefully that will aid once again in keeping consistency in having things move forward. So if we can get this to advance, there we go. Building code rulemaking for 2022. One of the things to make sure everyone understands is that DSA FLS does not write the regulations. By statute, this is vested with the Office of the State Fire Marshal, and we collaborate positively with the State Fire Marshal staff. Thank you to Crystal, who is on board today, and her associate, Greg Anderson. But it is a collaborative effort in an effort to, again, kind of keep things on track for our public schools and community colleges. One of the things that, came about last year or so was the early adoption, as requested by then Governor Brown, of the mass timber provisions. And those came about in the intervening code cycle. As part of this current package, the early adoption language is being repealed and will be replaced with the model code language in the IBC. So that's one of the big construction elements that's going on for those of you considering mass timber type of construction. Some edits to the technical requirements in an effort to address the clarity and consistency, but no real big time changes that should affect what your design awareness already is. And as you can see, we're in the 45-day comment period already, which is going through October 18th. And Crystal, if you need to pipe in about any changes or status of this, feel free.
We will have a 15-day for state specified building definition. So other than that, we plan to finalize everything by the 18th as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. And moving forward, some Chapter 7 elements going on. Something that should be of interest to you is that the requirements for the building owner, which would be the school district and community college district, to maintain an inventory of all required fire resistance rated construction and the construction installed to resist any passage of smoke, and that such construction be visually inspected on an annual basis and maintained. The school district will be responsible for repairing and restoring anything that's damaged or breached or penetrated. This isn't as much a plan review item for something you'd be submitting to DSA, but this is an operational end for your facilities staff that they should be aware of. Chapter 12 Energy Systems. This is something that is dear to the state's heart, again, in keeping with our net zero policy for schools. A lot of energy systems, battery storage, solar, photovoltaic, things of that nature going in on our campuses. Some of the previous provisions in Chapter 12 of the Fire Code have been repealed, or not repealed, but amended. There are requirements therein for emergency and standby power systems, plan information for construction projects, which is certainly going to affect the design community and submitting to DSA on plans for battery storage systems and energy storage systems on the campuses. These are certainly going to affect your photovoltaic battery storage or any other kind of emergency power storage system that is going to be constructed on the campus. And of course, we're going to have commissioning and decommissioning, and operational and maintenance provisions are included there in Chapter 12 of the Fire Code that, again, the facility staff are going to need to be aware of. So at the time of commissioning of DSA projects, you'll be able to get those records and maintain those records for further review or reference should the need arise. Chapter 49 requirements for the wildland urban interface areas. Construction drawings, that we're going to be in Chapter 7A of the Building Code. This is just to let you know that there are also requirements in Chapter 49 of the Fire Code. There's been some changes instituted, obviously in response to California's wildfires. Used to be fire season started in October and went a few months. Now it appears that fire season runs from January 1st to December 31st, and then we start all over again. Going to be requirements for our landscaping. Certainly the landscaping in very high fire hazard severity zones, sorry for that, should be some form of fire resistant vegetation as best as possible in keeping with your landscape and vegetation plans. Creation and maintenance of defensible space to protect the structures, development of landscape plans and long-term vegetation management. And this should tie in with your sustainability plans for the type of materials in your landscape scheme that you are installing. That, what happens after they're planted? Obviously, it's when they're small, they're easy to do, but what's going to be the long-term effect when they're at full development? Your trees are in full development. There was a question on what about crowning and such. Those are certain things that will have to be taken into consideration. And that's why we have here that they need to be maintained as they mature. Something new that is coming out in response to questions from a couple of landscape architects and some designers pertaining to fire department access and site water supply requirements. The FLS staff is creating a PowerPoint presentation to outline these requirements. Our goal is to ensure consistency and maintenance with the fire code provisions for emergency vehicle access and water supply. And what we'll do is, when this is fully developed and ready for use by you all, you'll get an email message through our great communication system that will let you know where to access this. And the goal is to have this be available through our training area on the website in an on-demand format. So you can reference it at any time. It will be updated as codes update. But the goal here is to give some background into the whats and wherefores and whys of the fire lanes and fire department water supply that is needed. And this will be especially important for modernization and alteration projects and new construction on existing campuses where buildings may be sited such they impact existing fire lanes. And now those fire lanes have to be modified or extended to the interior of a campus, which in itself can pose a problem. Real early on in the development design phase, we certainly want to address this type of an issue. And I strongly encourage that you utilize the preliminary review appointment process at the regional offices to go over any such issues so you're aware of them ahead of time and that they don't blindside you in the design end. And of course, you'll see this later on, but subscribe to our listserv. We want you to get information and we want you to be informed about actions that are going on at DSA. So please make sure you have our current access and that you're getting everything you need. And that ends my portion, and thank you very much.
Thanks, George. Do you want to take questions on that now at all, or?
If there are questions, please.
Anyone? Okay, Diane,
thank
you're
you.
on.
Hearing none.
Okay, let me see. I will share my screen, and then I need to start the PowerPoint here. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our structural safety rulemaking package that is part of this 2021 triennial code cycle, which will become the 2022 code. That involves Part 1, the administrative code, Part 2, the building code, and then Part 10, the existing building code. And I have a few slides following this going into examples of what we're doing, but our draft package was given to this group in February as part of our pre-cycle effort. We also had the public meeting in March ahead of the initial cycle. So I'm not going to, and we went into depth in that public meeting, went through all our proposals. That's not the purpose of what I'm trying to do here, but wanted to kind of hit some of the highlights and the examples of what we're doing. We have a change in the admin code regarding the requirement that construction shall commence within 4 years of approval. And what that is, that's doing away with the current process where the districts are required to reapply for 12-month extensions, and they can do that up to 3 times. The net result is it's still 4 years after approval anyway, but that it helps everyone out because you don't have to submit the form, we don't have to file it, you get 4 years to start construction. So hopefully that should help to reduce some of the paperwork on both ends. And then as far as the CBC, as George already mentioned, we had in the prior intervening cycle brought forward some early adoption of mass timber provisions that were model code for the 2021 IBC, because our 2022 CBC adopts the IBC as our model code. We're now repealing those amendments because they're no longer necessary. It's now part of our code. But beyond that, the bulk of our work in the structural safety package, we're making edits to technical requirements in the pursuit of clarity and consistency. But overall, there's not a significant changes in practice being proposed as part of our package. And as George mentioned for the fire, we're in the same boat for the structural safety package, is that we are still in our 45-day comment period. It ends on Monday. There's a link here. As mentioned earlier, you all will receive copies of this presentation, but you can go to BSC's website here and see the full packages for all the agencies. There's also an electronic submittal for comments, but getting close to the end of the comment period there and ready to move on to the Building Standards Commission meeting. So this was just another slide I put together. This shows, it'll look familiar to what we just talked about with the upcoming intervening, but this is the schedule that we've worked through for the current rulemaking cycle. We're right here in the public comment period in October. Our next step will be to go to the Building Standards Commission meeting, which is scheduled for January of next year, where it will be adopt and approve the rulemaking packages. And then once again, what happens after that, our Part 1, our admin code goes into effect a month later in February 2022, whereas the rest of Title 24 goes into effect January 2023. Just some examples of what we are doing in each part here. You see a snip of the express terms language showing the strikeout and underline of what we're doing here, which is eliminating the need for a written request for extension to be granted in annual increments. We're just putting it out to 4 years. There's some other work being done to the admin code, which is actually catching up with what we're already doing in practice. There's language in the admin code, excuse me. Language in the admin code that talks about a fee payment for landscape documentation. We're not currently doing that, so we're getting our regulations to catch up with that current practice. when it comes to part 2, as I mentioned before, the 2021 IBC is our model code, and then we bring forward all our amendments from the current 2019 California Building Code. Those get blended together, and that becomes our 2022 CBC. And then anything beyond that, the new amendments are shown in our rulemaking package. Here's an example of one area where we are striking what is currently an amendment, but it is the model code language that was involved in that early adoption of the tall wood provision. So we're striking this section because now it'll be part of the building code. In other areas, as I mentioned, we're making tweaks and changes to the technical language. And again, it's in the pursuit of improved clarity and intent. I have an example here where it talks about service load. So we're being more specific and saying that's allowable stress design load. The intent is to make it more clear for the user, make it more clear for our plan reviewers in interpreting the code. Another effort that we are doing, again, in the pursuit of clarity, is that since the 2021 was published, there have been supplements come out to the current ASE 7. There's also work being done for the next version of ASE 7, which is where we get our structural design loads and provisions from. That's on a 6-year cycle, so you can see 2022 is the next one that's coming. There's a few provisions that we've brought in, again, in the intent of providing better clarity to the designer. We're bringing in amendment language for site class E sites to be consistent with the ASCE 7 Supplement 3. We're also proposing early adoption of a few items regarding two-stage analysis and an exception for horizontal irregularity. Again, this is just intended to help the designer when they are using these provisions better interpret the code and use the best knowledge and intent at this time. And then for part 10, the existing building code, the bulk of our work here, again, is in chapter 3 of the existing building code. We had some definitions, which you can see are struck here or relocated. We had instances where we already have a definition for addition and alteration in our part 1. To have it here and in part 1 is duplicative and in some cases contradictory. We've gone through and tried to clean that up there. And that is the end of my slideshow, and I'll entertain any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Diane. There's one other issue that I wanted to bring to your attention that was a legislative change, so I'm going to share this slide. AB 306 was chaptered by the governor's office, or signed by the governor and chaptered in July of 2021, and it requires employee and teacher housing projects to be reviewed by the local jurisdiction and not by DSA. And I just wanted to alert all of you that in doing those projects by a school district or public housing, even if they're single family. So depending on however you approach housing on your campuses, whether it's for employees or teachers, or even for students, it's all public housing. But the requirement for employees and teachers, those projects do not need to come to DSA. They go to the local jurisdiction for review. We're just highlighting the code sections that are appropriate, and we've provided 2 reference documents that assist designers in designing public housing projects, especially housing at a place of education. Obviously, our access compliance reference manual for free is a free download on our website, and that's been updated to the July 1st, 2021 requirements, which brings in previous editions of the code prior to this July 1st supplement, made references to certain sections in Chapter 11A for accessibility when it comes to housing. We have moved all that out of 11A. Everything's in 11B, so we facilitated use of the code. And so if the projects for employee and teacher housing projects are public housing projects, they're housing at an education project, and you would only go to 11B. There's also the Guide to Public Housing regulated by Chapter 11B of the California Building Code. This is a new document, again, a free download, a great resource so that you ensure that when you're designing these projects, whether for employees, teachers, or students, that you provide the requisite accessibility. And I just want to let you know that while we don't provide design and construction oversight for employee and teacher housing because of this law and requirements in the admin code, we will still look at how that project, if it's on a campus, affects the students and affects the campus. Our eyes and ears will be on it anyway, just not for the building itself, but how it affects placement on the campus and other fire life safety elements for school districts. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and especially for the design professionals. The local jurisdictions may not always enforce the correct accessibility requirements, so you're welcome to reach out to DSA if you have questions on the accessibility requirements, but these documents, these two documents will go a long way to help that and help the local jurisdiction as you design your projects. Anyone have any questions on our rulemaking update? Because I believe it's complete.
Hey, this is Jeff Becker. Just a quick question on the housing rules. Will those buildings be looked at as non-conforming buildings from a structural standpoint if they're on a campus?
I believe so. Which is why we're going to take a look at them and make sure they're a very good distance away from students, and or at least protected in some manner, fencing.
All right, thanks, Ida.
Still checking on a break thing. We have about an hour left. Everyone's still good? We're still moving ahead? All right. Yes. Okay. Ryan Turner, we have a new IR coming regarding venting, and I'd like to turn it over to Ryan Turner to make the presentation.
Thank you, Ida. My name is Ryan Turner, and I will be presenting some new changes we're putting together in an interpretation of regulations and IR that's going to clarify some venting requirements. So this is currently being worked on. Before I get into it too much, I do want to give credit to those that have primarily worked on this document. We had Scott Davison in San Diego and Tab Cummins and the headquarters group primarily put this together, and I've been just kind of shepherding it along, and we've had some other folks at headquarters that have worked on it along the way. So I'll be providing a purpose for why this IR is needed, and also provide a background and then some scope to show you what all will be included. And then we'll also talk about when you can expect this to be posted to our website. The main reason that this IR is being put together, we wanted to clarify two different assembly types. So we're going to cover both vented and unvented attics and enclosed rafter assemblies. We'll be covering specific climate zones. The main purpose for this, these requirements, is to help avoid material decay that could occur, but we're also going to be addressing some fire life safety and energy concerns that have come into play in the recent codes. And with any IR, the main purpose or goal is to promote uniform statewide criteria and consistency so that everything is enforced similarly among the 4 DSA regional offices. So a quick background, this slide provides a demonstration of vented versus unvented. Of course, with vented, you'd have to have airflow allowed into the attic spaces. So you can see this would normally be provided by vents in the soffits or eaves that allow air to get into the attic space, and then it would flow out through the ridge vent at the top. And then on the right, this would be an unvented space that is completely enclosed and does not allow air into or out of the attic spaces. Continuing background, enclosed attic spaces, well, traditionally, attics and rafter spaces have always required ventilation. It's relatively new that there were some criteria put into place that would allow unvented assemblies. So the concept was initially introduced in the 2016 California Energy Code, but it really wasn't made effective for DSA projects until new language was provided in the 2019 CBC, or the current code. So I provided an excerpt from the 2016 CBC as well as the 2019 code. So on the lower left, you can see that ventilation was required. All projects have attic spaces shall have cross ventilation for each separate space by providing ventilation openings. And then in the 2019 CBC on the right, there was a new section 1202.2 that was added that says that roof assemblies shall be ventilated in accordance with the prior section, or there's also an option to comply with section 1202.3, which lays out all the requirements for unvented attic and unvented enclosed rafter assemblies. So that's just a quick background on when the unvented was first allowed on DSA projects. And then California Energy Code also has some requirements and provisions that come into play. I've provided an excerpt from section 120.7 on the right. So they do provide some mandatory insulation requirements that when insulation is placed at the roof, vents are not allowed to be installed. So that poses some problems that need to be worked out we'll go into that, and we're trying to cover that in the IR as what you would do when you're not allowed to install vents. So the CVC does provide various methods to help with this to prevent condensation from occurring to avoid the material decay. So for the scope of the IR, it's primarily going to be covering two options for roof assembly types. So again, you have the option of doing ventilated, and that's going to be covered in CVC 1202.2. And that section will address cross ventilation and opening requirements, as well as airspace requirements. And then we're also going to address fire life safety requirements as well. And that's actually in chapter 7, but we'll get into that later. And then for unvented, that's going to be in CVC 1202.3. And we'll go over some envelope requirements, vapor retarder requirements, also airspace requirements, and then finally insulation requirements. So for ventilated roof assemblies, we'll start with that. Again, cross ventilation is required for enclosed attics. In the figure on the right, you can see how air would be allowed to flow through the attic spaces through the soffit vent, and then again flow out towards the ridge ventilation at the top. A few things that would need to be provided. You need to have 1-inch minimum airspace between insulation and roof sheathing, 1/150 net-free cross ventilation area. There are some exceptions that would allow that net-free area to be reduced to 1/300 by providing a class 1 or 2 vapor retarder on the warm side of the ceiling. And then there's also some venting area requirements that have to be between 40 and 50% of the area placed in the upper portion of the rafter space. And then vent openings also will need to be protected against the entrance of rain or snow. And as I mentioned before, some fire life safety requirements that we're going to be addressing in this IR. Vent screens, when provided, will need to meet, for buildings that are located within fire hazards, severity zones, or wildland urban interface fire areas, the vent screens are going to need to meet the ember and flame intrusion requirements in CVC section 706A. Also, combustion air for fuel burning appliances are going to need to meet the requirements in the California Mechanical Code, Chapter 7. That also includes carbon monoxide detection. That's going to be in CVC section 915.1. Also, insulation, flame spread, and smoke development requirements are going to be addressed in the IR, and those will need to meet the fire test ratings per CVC section 720. And then any duct that's in the ventilated attic space will need to be insulated to a minimum R value 4.2 and shall comply with the California Mechanical Code section 604. Okay, so now we'll jump into unvented roof assemblies. So again, this is addressed in CVC section 1202.3. So any unvented attic and unvented enclosed rafter assembly is permitted, but there are 5 conditions that will have to be met. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I know we have a lot more on the agenda today. This is all clearly outlined in section 1202.3, but there are 5 conditions. So the first one is it needs to be completely within the building thermal envelope. Item 2, no interior class 1 vapor retarders are allowed to be installed on the ceiling side. And if you have wood shingles on your roof, there needs to be at least a 1/4 inch vented airspace separating the shingles from the structural sheathing. And then for climate zones 14 and 16, if there's any air impermeable insulation, so impermeable meaning the air can't flow through, it needs to have a class 2 vapor retarder coating or covering in direct contact with the insulation. And lastly, insulation. The insulation requirements, there are 4 sub items that need to be met depending on the air permeability, whether it's permeable or not, of the insulation. So when you have only air impermeable insulation, it has to be in direct contact with the underside of the structural roof sheathing as shown in the figure on the right. And where you have air permeable, this would be typically bat insulation inside the thermal envelope. It needs to comply with the same provisions in 511, but it also needs to have the insulation installed directly below the structural sheathing. A rigid board or sheet insulation shall also be installed directly above the structural roof sheathing. And can have a combination of both air impermeable and air permeable insulation. And when that's provided, I'm just going to skip through this in the interest of time, but there are certain requirements that need to be met, and that'll be addressed in the IR. And then lastly, you have an alternate to do rigid board or sheet insulation, but it would need to be installed directly above the structural roof sheathing as shown in the figure on the right. And if you're using pre-formed insulation boards, it does need to be sealed at the perimeter of each individual sheet to form a continuous layer below the roof sheathing. There are some exceptions as to when Section 1202.3 can be used, and so it does not apply to special use structures like swimming pool enclosures or data processing centers, hospitals, or art galleries. And also, if you have a climate zone 14 and 16 that's humidified beyond 35% during the 3 coldest months, it cannot be used in those cases either. The IR will also address some general requirements such as air leakage. It has to be sealed in compliance with Energy Code Section 110.7. For suspended ceilings, you're not allowed to place the insulation on top of the suspended ceilings with removable panels. And then for thermal barrier requirements, the foam plastic insulation needs to be separated from the interior of the building by a thermal barrier per Section 2603.4. There are some exceptions to that can be applied. And then for spaces without finished ceilings, the roof assembly needs to be considered non-vented. So with that, that concludes the overview. Again, this IR is still in progress. It's in draft form now. We're expecting after it goes through all of the vetting process and the formatting and so on, we're planning to have it posted by the first quarter of 2022. Hopefully sooner, but I just wanted to provide a rough idea of when to expect that. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions or comments.
This is Crystal. I have a question. So these roofs are for residential and commercial? Is that correct?
I believe it's just non-residential for some of the requirements. Perhaps George or Ida, you might be able to answer that better.
I'm trying to remember from that chapter 12. It is in the building code. I would say for multifamily, it probably applies just because the residential code applies for single family and smaller projects, and I haven't checked that. It is a requirement for non-residential, and we receive a lot of questions with the addition of the bad insulation, but also requiring the rigid on top, depending on the climate zone and a lot of this is to protect the sheathing from mold and moisture requirements. But that's a good question. I would say from memory where it is in the code, I don't believe it's expressed specifically for non-residential, but I mean yes, explicitly for non-residential, I would believe that it might apply. Sorry. Don't have a definitive answer for you for that.
This is Tab Cummins. I can answer.
Good. Go Tab. I forgot you were on the call, so thank you.
So this does apply to res and non-res. So the requirement is if you have a T-bar ceiling, then you have to put the insulation up at the roof. So typically residential, you have a hard lid for the ceiling. And so you're then allowed to place the insulation on the ceiling, and that goes for commercial as well. It's just that in commercial, probably 90% of the times you have a T-bar ceiling, and so yeah, it needs to be put up.
So my only comment then would be if this is going to be for both, to correlate the residential code sections or some kind of statement in the IR. And that would be my only comment.
Thank you, Crystal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Anyone else? All righty, moving along to our penultimate, other than closing remarks, is our roundtable discussion. Is Ryan Huxley on the call?
Yes.
Hi, Ryan, you're on.
Hello. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. I'm going ahead and get that started here. And I'll go ahead and go through a PowerPoint presentation here. And because I know we're a little bit behind, I'll be speaking quickly. So with that, we'll just jump right in. So overall, we're going to be talking about what is the project inspector shortage issue and talk about some of the data that we have, some historical data, and then discuss information about that. So overview of what I'll be going over. First, we'll be talking about some of the current localized project inspector shortages based upon feedback received from the field engineer statewide team, that's FEST. We'll also look at some of the historical project inspector data. Then we'll look at some information related to the 2017 Project Inspector Advisory Task Force group, such as what were the findings associated with that, and then what were our responses to that. And then we'll open it up for discussion. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump on in. So first, looking at the regional data received from the field supervisors throughout the state. So there are some potential shortages in a few localized areas, but it's not statewide. So looking at it a little bit more, so at least for DSA, for the DSA Sacramento region, so at least in Fresno, there are anticipated to be many regional retirements for inspectors in the next couple of years. There are maybe some other isolated areas with potential shortages. Regarding the Oakland regional area, some of the northern districts near Oregon may be seeing some shortages of Class 1 and 2. And there's also concern that there might be Class 1 project inspectors retiring soon, and I'll be talking a little bit later about retirements and the old speculation, will they retire, won't they retire? So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then with regards to the LA region, generally it seems to be okay, but there is concern about the aging project inspector population, again, with the concerns about possible retirements. And then for San Diego, it seems that they're generally okay, but the project inspector demand may be inflated by inspector brokers regarding some of the information that they are providing. So with that, we'll go on to looking at now some historical data. So this graph on the vertical axis here gives the total number of inspectors, and then the horizontal axis here is time marching on from 95 until about 2020. I will say the data here is maybe not quite as refined as some of the other data, but just very briefly, if you're wondering why are we seeing some of these dropping off, well, it turns out that these are some of the older project inspector classifications that we had here with the general, site, and assistance. And so those generally got discontinued in the early 2000s. So it's really the Class 1, 2, 3, and 4 that we should be looking at. And as you can tell here, Class 1 is the most predominant, with the Class 2 and 3 below that. And you can see that there's generally a trend for a decrease over time here, with the high being back in roughly 2012. Then looking again at some data for inspector ages. And so this is at least information based upon data we had from 2017. So given the year now, you could probably shift this entire graph almost one whole segment over here. But you can get an idea that the vast majority of our inspectors are in the upper ranges where people do begin to at least start thinking about retirement. So that's something to be aware of. We still have some more in here, and there of course have been some others who've come on 2018, 19, and 20, and even 21 that are not reflected here. So this is data based upon, I believe it was as of 2017. So now let's talk about what are some of the USA retirement trends. Well, based upon a 2014 Gallup study, it turns out that the actual retirement age has increased over time. So back in 2002, most people thought that, most people actually did retire at around age 59. That was the average. And then in 2014, it went up a little bit to about 62. So we're seeing a little bit of an increase there. And it's also interesting to note that older individuals expect retiring later in life than younger individuals. So that gets into a whole other interesting conversation regarding what people maybe are hoping for earlier in their years versus what reality may end up being later on. And so here we see some of that information here. So this is a chart from that Gallup study. So as far as at what age do you expect retirement? And then these are the different age cohorts. And so you can see for this older group, a larger percentage of them are thinking, it's probably going to be sometime over 65. And that's generally the case. So this is generally higher than some of the earlier age groups. So perhaps reality is setting in for them, unfortunately. Or maybe they're just enjoying working and want to continue to do so. Anyhow, the study doesn't get into the reasons for that, but just broadly speaking, that's some information there. There's also a 2018 Gallup study, and it turns out that the anticipated retirement age also increased. So back in 95, people thought they would retire at around age 60, and in 2018, they thought it was 66. Just a brief comparison to some of this data, it does look like people are still retiring earlier than what they had anticipated, though these are slightly different years, but I thought that was worth noting. And now, of course, given what has happened recently, so there's a 2020 Pew Research study, and it turns out that more baby boomers retired in 2020. So this chart here shows the annual increase in the retired US baby boomer population in millions. So this is the percentage increase. So you can see last year there was quite a bit more compared to previous years. And then if you wanted to get a little bit finer look at the data, this is actually looking at it just between February of last year to September of last year. So there were some more increases. So I'm not going to worry about getting into some of these finer details here, but that information is available if you were to look up that 2020 Pew Research survey. Now there's even some data that is available from an Alliance survey. Alliance is a life insurance company. This is from 2021. So this is February of this year. So we have about 68% of retired respondents retired earlier than expected, which is up from about 50% in 2020. So kind of similar to the data that we just saw. Now moving on to some more historical data. So this covers from roughly, again, so now the vertical axis here is the number of individuals who were tested, who took the project inspector exam. Horizontal down here are the years with some of the months in which the exams occurred. So we go up to about 2015. So you can see generally there's a downward trend. It's worth noting that in the 2013 admin code that we had more restrictive qualification requirements than we did previously. So there was a bit of a drop around that time frame. And while this notes no well, you may say, sorry, do we have nobody testing? No, that's not correct. This is just the data that we had up to that point in time. We have had people testing even through to just late last month, and we'll have again in October. So this was just the data that we had quickly and available to give this information to you. So ignore the zeros. All right, so now let's look at the, again, some more historical data. So on the vertical axis here is the percent. Horizontal axis is time. These are some of the different exam dates and so on. So you can see this goes from 2014 to 2016. And generally our pass rate's been less than half, some quite a bit less than half, with at least the last one that we have displayed in this graph being on the lower side. And I can tell you that we have seen generally an increase in the percent passing based upon some of the changes we've made, which I'll get into in a little bit more detail. So now jumping to the 2017 Project Inspector Advisory Task Force findings. So first, it was to allow other agency or municipal inspectors on a temporary basis to inspect DSA regulated projects. Another recommendation was to provide a grace period for inspectors who were certified and lost their certification for a health concern. Then we also were asked to consider provide information about active project inspector workload online, as far as how many projects are they working on. Are they very busy, or are there some that maybe are available to help facilitate schools being able to find available inspectors? There's also recommendations about modifications to the project inspector certification exam. This is the initial one they need to pass in order to become DSA certified. Then there's also discussion about promoting the project inspector profession through a marketing campaign, making some changes to the qualification criteria to be able to sit for the project inspector certification exam, remove or get rid of the Class 4 inspector examination and adjust the Class 3 qualification criteria accordingly, use testing centers for the project inspector certification as well as the recertification examinations to try and make more venues available for that, and provide an online project inspector training and accept other training and educational providers. And so what I've done now here is to note which items I'm going to be, those that are remaining still here in dark font, the black font, are things that we have some responses for, and the other two we don't have information on, but that I think that ties in perhaps what others might be able to do beyond DSA, but that's what the discussion will be about. So let's look at some of DSA responses to these. So with regards to this first item here, providing a grace period. So PL 1901 is the Project Inspector Certification Extension, provides the process to inspectors who've lost their certification, and this is even applicable for those whose reasons are beyond health concerns. With regards to the Project Inspector Active List and their availability, we have the Project Inspector Availability List on our website that's updated approximately twice a month. With regards to modifying the certification exam, there's several modifications that DSA has undertaken. One of the first things that we did was revise problematic questions. This was often through subject matter expert committees. One of the ways that we went through about how did we determine which were problematic questions is we looked at what the number of individuals who got a question right or wrong and how many and which question option they chose to help us understand if there was a high percentage of individuals who did not get the question right, then that was one that we should take a look at. But then we also did a second filter where we looked at, for those who did pass the exam, how many of them got the question wrong? So kind of a secondary filter to try and make sure that we really ought to make a change to this question, or was this just a very good differentiating question? Those who scored well, understood, and passed that question, versus those that even had those who did well had trouble with. As far as allowing to pass by sections, that was a significant change from past practice. In the past, if individuals had not passed both parts, there was a plan reading part and a code or construction knowledge part. If they didn't pass one of those parts, they had to retake everything. So now what we're doing is we're allowing individuals to pass by sections. There's 3 sections for the plan reading and 4 for the code or construction knowledge. So individuals can pass by sections now, and that's helped increase the numbers of people passing and then therefore becoming certified. We've also increased the exam time permitted for individuals to complete it through both reducing the number of questions for some of the different classifications, as well as providing additional time. So in the past, this was a single 1-day test. Now it's been broken. We've given more time. Now it ends up being about a 2-day test. And we also have more exam administration offerings. Often in the past, we were having it in 2 locations on the same days or very close to it. So continuing on with some of our responsive actions taken as far as modifying the qualifications to sit for the Project Inspector Certification exam, we made modifications for the 2019 Administrative Code, which has significant modifications that were made, largely driven by input provided during this task force discussion. So there are more qualification pathways, the legitimate ones that were previously not recognized, that are now explicitly identified. We've reduced a little bit the minimum number of years of experience required, and we're also now allowing individuals who may be lacking up to a year of experience to still take the exam, but they wouldn't become certified until they'd completed their minimum years of experience. And that was a big thing that was mentioned during the task force group, was the importance of experience that individuals must have in order to become DSA certified inspector, how crucial that experience background is, not just the code book or knowledge background. With regards to eliminating the Class 4 Project Inspector exam and making modifications and adjustments to the Class 3, that was done also in the 2019 Administrative Code. And with regards to testing centers for the examinations, we do have currently some third-party proposals that have been received for taking the Project Inspector examination online, at least parts of it. And then as far as the recertification exam online, we've been offering that through our DSA Academy LMS. And we have, of course, we have the new one, but we've even been offering it through our LMS that we had last year since about the fall. And that ties in, well, with the last item that I mentioned here with the online inspector training. We have that for both the project inspector overview, the research seminar, and then now we have a third-party provider, which is applicable to the Title 24 mechanical acceptance training, and that's being provided by NEMIC. So with that, we get into the discussion then. What are some of the steps that school districts and or others can take? And then what other steps should we consider? And here's some things that we're wondering about. Here's at least one thing that we're considering as far as should we reduce the cost? Because it's worth noting that compared to other groups, DSA costs and time are generally more than others. For example, with regards to the ICC California combination certification, that entails 4 different certifications. There's a building inspector, electrical inspector, plumbing inspector, mechanical inspector. If you get all of those, then which is pretty much what we generally need, because keep in mind that project inspectors look at everything except for special inspections and so on, although sometimes they look at those too. But they're looking at all of these different disciplines. So anyhow, so for the ICC, there's a slightly less cost involved, but there is generally a little bit more time involved with being able to take all of those examinations and the times associated with that. For OSHPD, there's actually significantly less costs and less time as well associated with their exams. So with that, I open it up to the discussion.
So
hey Ryan, this is Fred over
brainstorming session to see what can we collectively do to increase the numbers. Go ahead. I'm sorry for whoever I interrupted.
Sorry about that. This is Fred over at Citrus College. Ryan, thanks for the wonderful presentation. I love the marketing idea. And I think one of the things that could be done is I see an opportunity on the career technical education side. And I think not only at the high school level, but especially at the community college level, that's a room for growth there. I don't know if it's offered anywhere. We're always trying to grow the CTE, and I see a real opportunity there. And then on the marketing, as folks get older in their career, especially on the carpentry side, we see a lot of transitioning from maybe being a framer over to becoming an inspector. That would satisfy not only the experience, but maybe on the marketing, maybe if we reached out to the Carpenters Union, some of the other organizations like CMAA, CSI, et cetera, like that, you might be able to pick up some viable opportunity.
Thank you, Fred.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead, David.
Yeah, just tagging on to what Fred said, we did have at one of the colleges, I was approved to instruct a course at Orange County Community College. That went on for 3 years between 2004 through the end of 2006. We probably went through about 200 students. A lot of them are still in the inspection community today. In fact, 2 of them are currently OSHPD ACOs, and that was discontinued when the DSA Academy was reopened up again. So anyway, but that's a heck of an idea that Fred's got, to introduce that, because it does put a big workload on DSA as well. And then tagging on to what Ryan was saying, I have both my DSA Class 1 and OSHPD, and in comparison, some people don't know the costs, but it cost me about $1,000 to recertify for DSA every 4 years, and to recertify for OSHPD, it costs $100. So Ryan wasn't kidding about that significant less cost. Another thing too is retention could be an incentive for a lot of the retirement age people like myself, although I'm not thinking of retiring right now because I actually love what I do. And it's been a real honor for me to participate at this level with DSA over the past 15 years, and I do appreciate it. And I'm very grateful to be here with you all now. I'll give you my input. ACIA has also been a partner with DSA a lot, and we have in the past put on a lot of presentations with both DSA and OSHPD with a lot of success. Of course, with COVID, that has really had a little bit of a detrimental impact. But retention would probably be something to think about, because the recertification process is what the input I'm getting from the retirement age people is that, you know what, it's just cost too much. It's too hard to go through again. And you know what, the people that are on the fence, they take the easy way out and take that first off ramp and they leave. And you might get another 3 to 5 years out of some of these people if there was another way of a consideration that. And like Forrest Gump, that's all I got to say about that.
Ida, may I take just one more minute to add on to what Dave said real quick? He really brings up a success story that he talked about over at Orange Coast. Maybe if we reached out to, I know you've brought up this topic at the facilities task force at the chancellor's office, and it generates a little bit of discussion, but what if we did a little presentation on maybe, and I hate to volunteer you, Dave, but maybe a little 5-minute success story, and maybe that would generate something on not only on the facilities task force side, but maybe it would generate something on the educational side that could be brought out to the rest of the community colleges as a whole.
I would not be opposed to that at all. Actually, one of the other honors I did have was when the DSA Academy was being revitalized back, I believe it was 2007. I donated my entire curriculum to the DSA Academy, and I was asked to be the inspector member of that, and was able to participate in the development of the academy at that time. But since Fred volunteered me, I accept that Pepsi challenge.
I can't think of one college that would turn away growth for students right now, especially when they're down on enrollment.
Yeah.
And I think a big key part is when we're educating them in the inspector field, how do we then encourage the DSA inspector field? I know that there's a lot of work we need to do. Costs is one of them, but it's also the process of working with DSA and the value of that and the value of the mission of school construction, right? A lot of the inspectors probably have kids and grandkids, and contributing to that is part of that big messaging, because we don't want to lose them as we train them. We know that we can't force them to stay on a project inspector track. But I think a lot of it also has to occur that if we can collaborate, I think the CTE programs in schools is a great idea. I know that we also explored mentorship opportunities with our existing project inspectors. We had goals for that, and COVID kind of threw that by the wayside because all of a sudden we were shut down for 2 years in schools, and just from a safety perspective in developing those mentorship opportunities. But I think it's important that if we can foster more CTE programs, we can work in-person appearance from our staff, messaging, helping with providing curriculum. We can make something work as long as we do it together. It's very hard for us to do it on our own, but I think in a collaborative effort, we could do it together. These are all great ideas. Clint?
Yeah, real quick. Thanks, Ryan. I thought that was a very good presentation, good data. One of the questions I had was, does DSA track the volume of projects that are approved by a region? And is there any metrics for inspectors per volume of projects? So if DSA has X number of millions that's approved versus the number of certified inspectors in a region, is there a metric that you have to track that to determine if there truly is a shortage? I mean, I understand the retirement, but just curious, is there a metric that DSA uses?
We do have some data related to that. I'll share my screen again here briefly. So this data here, there's a fair amount going on, but so let me go through it very quickly. So this is the DSA project totals and revenue versus project inspectors for this time frame. So on the left-hand side, this is the total number of DSA projects. On the right-hand side is the cost, and then this is on the horizontal axis here are the years, and then the orange bars are the DSA project totals. The gray bars are the number of project inspectors, so that's on the same, that's tied back to this left vertical axis, and then project cost here is the green line. So obviously some of this data back here is just so old we don't really have any accurate data. But at least from roughly about, I would say probably about 2004 and on, at least for the fiscal information. So from about 2004 and on, we have some data that helps at least allow us to look at that kind of information. But I think this is only the first part of what you're talking about, perhaps, right? As far as then the number of projects certified.
Yeah, I mean, this looks like this is for the entire state, but when you opened up, you said Sacramento and Fresno has probably the largest shortage. So if you looked at Sacramento and the Central Valley, the number of approved projects currently versus the number of inspectors, what does that true potential shortage look like? Could it be very severe versus this historical data that may be for the entire state?
So that's a good question. And while I don't have that data available to be able to share, I think that we could extract that information from the data that we do have access to.
Okay.
Maybe we can work to bring that back in our next PSCC meeting if, and see what it results in. But I think it would be good information to have, especially in collaboration with local programs. And if students know there's a specific shortage in a specific area, they may be more enticed to go there to pursue opportunities.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Dsa?
This is Dsa with the Oakland office. And one thing I've been very curious about, how do we track people into the project inspector career path? And I've talked to different districts and such, and it seems like starting at the high school level would be really a critical time to start introducing that and getting kids interested in it. And I recognize that it's helpful to have seasoned professionals working in the project inspector field, but that DSA maybe could reach out to high school, what's it called, career development days or something to talk about DSA inspectors and CTE, utilizing CTE programs through the high schools. Because I can't remember who it was that I spoke with, but they were saying that it would be really good to start early introducing the idea. And I really think, I had a friend who was a president of one of the community colleges, and she really felt strongly that trying to get something set up with the community colleges would be a great way to do that.
Thank you, Dsa. Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Ida. I want to tie together what Fred and Dsa and Clint shared. And being from Fresno, just a data point, I quickly looked up the inspector availability for Fresno County, and there are 3. And none of them have a Fresno area code on their phone. So to give you an idea of the challenge that we face. To Fred's comment about community college and Dsa's regarding high schools, I think that there is something there. And I think that there needs to be a regional component to that, of where we focus. We don't want to create an excess number of inspectors in a certain area and still have a dearth of inspectors in other areas. By the way, we do have a technical education charter high school, and I have a project going there right now, and they're dual enrolled with our community college. And I'm all the time having our inspector, our architect, our construction firm talk to these kids to introduce them to possibilities in the general construction industry. But I think we need to take a regional approach to this, since we're seeing regional problems. I think having a curriculum that could be easily implemented at community colleges would be very helpful in that regard.
There might likely also in your area, Jeff, be a nexus even with UC Merced in trying to do some outreach there. I know that they're big on sustainability, and as our buildings get more fine-tuned and more operational in that realm, maybe there's a branch off that ties into picking those that have that interest at the UC Merced programs as well, in boots on the ground type of work.
Yeah, and we're really in the business as owners of being the owner of choice, because I'm competing with other districts for these inspectors. So I want to make sure my project's the best, they enjoy working with me. I think that's a skill set that an owner should be developing as well.
Dsa, your hand is still up. Is there more comments?
I just wanted to say one thing real quickly, and maybe this was mentioned, but reaching out to construction trade organizations to see if, or trade journals to see if there are people that would be interested in switching to project inspection or working with DSA or with districts. So that was another thing.
Thank you. Clint, you have your hand up? Clint Williams?
He's muted, I think. Clint,
I thought I took it down. Nope.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No hand up.
Buddy?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to maybe get more excitement from the younger generation, the high school and the community college. I love the idea of reaching out and establishing programs in that. But maybe one other thing to consider would maybe be some type of internship program that could allow some of these students that don't really have an idea of what they're getting into to maybe get some experience somehow. We participate with an IPAL program with the new School of Architecture in San Diego. It's the Integrated Path of Architectural Licensure. So we consistently have 1 to 2 interns in our office that are just seeing what we do, participating on where they can, but it really gives them a sense of what they're getting into after graduation. So it might be a way to give some exposure to high school or community college students to see what is this pathway, and maybe it's something that is a good fit for them professionally.
Thank you, Buddy. David, Karina?
Yeah, excuse me. Oh, I'm on. One of the other things too that I saw early on in Ryan's presentation was the inspection brokers. Southern California has seen a tremendous increase in growth of brokers. It seems like every time somebody gets a class 1, they put a shingle on their door and they gather a bunch of contracts and they hire inspectors to work for them. And now the inspectors aren't necessarily working independently the way the code says that they were supposed to. When I first started doing this, it was pretty much every school district hired an inspector. Now they go through brokers, and the broker calls everybody on the list. And every time, even projects that I'm bidding on, I get calls from somebody's wife or their girlfriend or somebody saying, hey, we've got this great project for you. Can you send us your resume? And in some of the districts like LA school district, if a project inspector gives their resume to one broker and 10 brokers actually are bidding on it, if you give your resume to one broker, you will not be considered with another broker. So it really cuts down on the independent market. And I don't know that there's anything DSA can do about it, but it's been discouraging, and it's another incentive for a lot of people to say, hey, I'm tired, I'm done, this is not the way it was when I started, and then they retire. And it's real prevalent down here in Southern California.
Are those unwritten rules? How did rules get created?
You know, I don't know. They were allowed to happen because the code does say that the owner, the school district, is to provide for an inspector. No offense to any school district reps here, but they take the easy way out and hire a broker. And if they don't like somebody, they tell the broker, or it's just too easy for an inspector to lose their job. They get replaced. A lot of people like myself, I'm not a broker. I work independently. I get calls from them all the time. And the area of micromanagement is really, it's highly prevalent. And a lot of inspectors get micromanaged because they have to walk a fine line, or they get replaced. And the replacement happens real easy. And the only reason they get is you're not a good fit. These are some seasoned veterans that are going through this. I'm not talking about somebody brand new. There's people with 10, 15, 20 years experience in the Orange County area, Riverside County area, and in San Diego. So it's been an issue that I've discussed with Ryan before in the past.
Thank you, David. I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. We have about 3 minutes left. We are nearing the end of our program. So George, I will let you. Jeff, I know your hand still is indicated as up, but I don't see it. It might be a glitch on Teams because I don't see it on your picture, but I see it on the list. So no, it's gone now. So George, you are left.
I just wanted to add in here that we have to remember that with trade, drain, and retirement, inspectors, your competition in this field is also to every municipal agency in the state. They're also looking for inspectors and tradespeople. And I think one of the things that has happened, at least in my career in this world, there hasn't really been a concerted promotion of inspection as a career. Generally, people become an inspector because they've retired from the trade, or maybe they got injured in the trade and couldn't do certain skill sets. So they became inspectors or as a second career. So I think this goes back to the promotion and the availability of training and what are going to be the acceptable KSAs for an inspector to get hired. So that, I think, goes back to our community colleges, the trade halls, and whomever, to really promote this as a viable career in the state. The state of California has an awful lot of construction going on. Everybody wants inspectors. You can basically write your own ticket to get your job done first. I really think the educational aspect and the outreach is vital in this area. That's all.
Thank you,
agree.
George.
Agree.
All right, to be mindful of everyone's time, I just want to make sure our 2022 PSCC meeting schedule, we anticipate 3 times a year. As you have already seen, we've canceled one if we have nothing to bring to you. We'd rather capture your time and make it worthwhile than just have a meeting. We had been on a schedule of February, March, June, July, October, November. That still works with everyone, and we will send out a Google poll or doodle poll, however they're called, on specific dates so that they can be reserved on your calendar, and we will let you know in advance if we need to cancel so that you can make that time free. I did want to do a brief check-in on our clients' return to office. Right now, we are still in emergency telework mode, meaning our staff is not in the office, only certain staff are. Those who choose to be and those who need to be or are requested to be on an intermittent basis for our workload. But most of our staff is still remote. While we are on emergency telework, it is likely that we will stay with no clients in office. If you do need any kind of in-person interaction, just reach out to us and we'll demonstrate how we can accommodate that. As of next week, our staff who is not vaccinated or declined to state will require testing. And because that goes into effect, that creates an additional complication with our clients. And so that's why we have chosen to remain in a no clients in office status as of yet. But when that changes and as we emerge from this pandemic, which will happen in 2022, I'm hopeful, then we will be providing that communication to everyone. But I just wanted to let you know where we stand with that. Other than that, unless there's any other questions, I thank you for your time today. I thank every DSA staff member who was in attendance and provided input and information to the group. I thank all of you for volunteering on the PSCC and for attending and for your feedback and your input. If you have additional thoughts, please reach out to the regional manager, to me on any of the topics we discussed today, or have any additional questions. We encourage you to do your outreach to the constituency group you represent, so that we can foster that communication. As you can see, we got a lot of information covered today, and we will send you out the PowerPoint shortly. So other than that, thank you so much. We'll see you in February, March.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.